Okay then, I think we are recording. Hello and welcome to question and answer number 175. And that's a relatively high number. I am your host, Punnadhammo. This is my beverage. And the umbrella is working really good. Look at how taut that umbrella is. And of course, 175 is not a prime number. It is in fact 5 times 5 times 7. And I'm sitting before you in a Christmassy environment, you might say, not because of any particular Christmas spirit on my part, but because my sweetie did not want to vacate her place in the studio. There were times as a monk, I'd be just looking at the calendar trying to figure out what day it was. And I'd think, oh, yesterday was Christmas. Or yesterday was my birthday. Both of those have happened before when I was a monk in Burma. Just losing track of what day it is on the calendar. I mean, you're kind of in tune with the phases of the moon. You know, to some degree, the position of the moon amongst the constellations. But the actual calendar date, it would elude me sometimes. And I was going to say something else too, and you know, it's like I'm talking, and then like somewhere like in the back of my mind, there's like, you should also mention this, and then it's like, okay, and then by the time I get to the end of that sentence, and maybe another sentence after that, it's gone. So sorry about that. I've been kind of busy this weekend, so this Q&A is going to be later, going to be uploaded later than usual, because I just got to rest from just hectic work environment, and then I can't remember what we were doing yesterday, but then today I'm going out, doing some last minute Christmas shopping and getting some groceries in before my sweetie's mama shows up for her Christmas visit. We got the tent in the backyard all set up for her. It's not big enough for her to stand up in, but I mean, you don't stand up when you're sleeping anyway, so that's neither here nor there. Gosh, there was something I was going to say that was almost sort of important or interesting or something, but I guess I might as well just wade into this and answer questions. Also, I had sort of a heavy dinner because this is late. It's going to be midnight by the time I'm done, probably. Well, almost midnight anyway, because we got kind of a lot of questions too. So I suppose I should just commence to answering those questions. And the first question is from Fred. And Fred says, I understand there was no chanting in Buddha's lifetime. Can chanting be detrimental? Well, I mean, it depends on what your definition of chanting is. I mean, if chanting is kind of a sing-song, kind of a droning recitation, then there was chanting in the Buddha's time, but it wasn't done by Buddhists. It was done probably by Brahmins mostly. Obviously, lots of chanting done by Vedic priests intoning over the fire sacrifice. Probably other spiritual systems too did chanting. But if chanting is just recitation, then yeah, there was plenty of that in early Buddhism also, because nothing was written down in the Buddhist time. And so the Buddha's teachings, like the Vinaya rules, the Patimokkha, all that kind of stuff, it had to be recited. But there is a rule of monastic discipline that one is not supposed to recite texts in a sing-song voice, which means that almost all monks who chant nowadays, except maybe some Thai monks, because they got a pretty good monotone drone going when they chant. But a lot of monks that are like doing like the sing-song kind of intonation when they're reciting, there's actually a rule of monastic discipline against that. It's a minor rule. It's just a dukkha offense. Just make confession and it's absolved. But also, there is a scene in the Vinaya of some monks who used to be Brahmins. I mean, I guess they were still technically Brahmins, although also technically anyone who's ordained as a bhikkhu becomes a kind of honorary Khattiya or Kshatriya, because they are sons of the Buddha, who was a member of the Kshatriya Wana, the Khattiya Wana in Pali. Anyways, these Brahmin monks came to the Buddha and asked permission for them to sort of convert like Buddhist teachings into Sanskrit verse? And the Buddha said no. In fact, he said, you should learn Dhamma in your own language, or one should learn Dhamma and recite Dhamma in one's own language. And then the commentary says one's own language really means the Buddha's own language, which is Pali. But probably the Buddha's own language was similar to Pali, but not quite Pali. And it's pretty clear from the context that he just means whatever the vernacular is, whatever is your native language, then you can go ahead and learn and recite Dhamma in your own language. Of course, he didn't really, he was living in the Ganges Valley of the 5th century BCE. So, probably all of the languages that were spoken were derived from Vedic Sanskrit. Maybe there might have been some hill tribes that were still speaking some non-Indic languages, but they, for the most part, weren't converting to Buddhism. So the Buddha did prohibit converting Buddhist teachings into Sanskrit verse, which almost all of the schools of Buddhism just rejected or ignored, and they just took the ball and ran with it and converted their scriptures, or just composed from scratch a lot of their scriptures in Sanskrit verse, which technically is against the rules, but they changed the rules too so that it wasn't against the rules no more. But getting to the actual question here, can chanting be detrimental? It would just depend on your mental states. Again, people are continually, like Western Buddhists, continually ignoring or overlooking the plain fact that just outward physical actions, including making noise with your mouth, is just ethically neutral. That what is ethical, what is making good karma and bad karma, is the accompanying mental states, your volition, your will. So chanting can be detrimental if you're chanting for bad reasons. Maybe you're just wanting to be famous, you're showing off, you're proud of how good you're chanting, how well you're chanting, I should say. That kind of stuff, there's going to be subtle, unskillful karma involved. Or, a lot of the time, anyone who's chanted a lot or just recited a lot, because I would chant in the sense of reciting, but I did avoid the sing-song voice. Some monks cultivate their own unique kind of sing-song voice as a sort of brand. Just in the chance that they become famous, they've got their brand going. Like anyone who has listened to Chanting Sayadaw, probably the recordings of Chanting Sayadaw chanting are becoming rarer and rarer as the old cassette tapes wear out. But back like in the 90s, when I became a monk, Chanting Sayadaw, you would hear Chanting Sayadaw wherever you would hear or any kind of Burmese Dhamma. And he had this really unique sort of melodious caterwauling that he would do that, nobody could imitate it. As far as I could tell, it was just this weird caterwauling that he would do. And you just listen to 3 seconds of it. Yeah, that's Chanting Sayadaw. But he was eventually murdered by, I think it was his own attendant, for his money. His attendant murdered him to steal his money. So Chanting Sayadaw was not a paragon of monastic discipline. But getting back to whether chanting can be detrimental, if you're chanting like black magic spells or something, yeah, but it depends on the volition. If it's, hey, look at me, look how good I'm chanting, how well I'm chanting, then still there's going to be subtle detrimental effects. In fact, if you're not fully enlightened in your chanting, then, there's going to be some subtle detrimental effects anyway, some subtle bad karma involved just through the delusion. Even if there's no attraction and aversion, there's still delusion. And also, it is possible. I know from my own experience, I started to say this like 3 minutes ago and then sidetracked myself. But, if you've chanted something enough times, you can be sitting there chanting the Metta Sutta, blessing a house or something, while at the same time, it's just automatic. It's just force of habit, and your mind is somewhere else. You're thinking about something else. So, you can be chanting like sacred scripture can be coming out your mouth, but at the same time, you could be thinking about, boobs or something. It's possible. It does happen, I am sure. So, yeah. So getting back to this question sort of as a review, there was chanting in the Buddha's lifetime. The Buddha, I mean, like the Brahmins, they'd be chanting in verse, the verses from the Vedas, that kind of thing. And the Buddha just made it against the rules to chant in a sing-song voice. You should just recite Dhamma in a normal conversational tone. So if that's still called chanting, I assume it would be. Depends on your definition of chanting. Then there was chanting in the Buddha's lifetime. There was definitely recitation because things were not written down. That's how you memorize stuff. That's how you carried the message from one generation of monks to the next, was just through memorization and just regular recitation. And chanting can be detrimental just based on the mental states of the person who's chanting or reciting. And I'm just going to move on to Fred's next question. And this, I have to admit, sometimes Fred asks questions. He's not the only one, but sometimes Fred asks questions that I really don't fully understand what he's trying to get at. And so Fred here says, can meditation only lead you back to the source of projection? And what exactly is the source of projection? From the Buddhist point of view, that would be like ignorance. Avijja is the source of just sort of samsara. I guess that's what he means is what is projecting samsara. But it may be that he's using the word source sort of the way Paul Lowe used to use the word source, as just the absolute, the ultimate. Different teachers will use a different word for, the highest truth or the ultimate, paramata sacha. I guess Eckhart Tolle uses being. Most theists, of course, use God. So can meditation only lead you back to the source of projection? I assume he means that would be at best, because of course meditation can lead you in all sorts of directions. It can lead you into realms of delusion. It's like you start having visions in your meditation and then you just get carried away with that. Forget to just mindfully note it and let it go. You just get caught up in it and it can lead you all over the places. You can start getting like psychic powers and then just get caught up in the psychic powers, all that kind of thing. So let's say that Fred here is asking if the best meditation can do, best case scenario, is lead you to the ultimate, the absolute. And yeah, I would agree with that. Meditation from a Buddhist point of view, or at least from an old-fashioned, early Buddhist point of view, the purpose of meditation is just reduce distraction, reduce perception, reduce papancha until you can see through it to the ultimate truth, which is always right there. It's just obscured by all this distracting perception that everyone's having. So, yeah, I guess so. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Jeffrey. And Jeffrey, he's somewhat unusual in that his last name is a number instead of spelled with letters. It's spelled with just numbers. But I won't dox him by stating his numerical last name. And he says, what is your general knowledge and opinion of the work of Edgar Cayce? And I have read a few books about Edgar Cayce. In fact, my father, when he was a kid, his mother, my grandma Reynolds, actually wrote to Edgar Cayce when Edgar Cayce was still alive. And my father recorded this in a kind of occult autobiography that he wrote, which has not been published. Maybe that'll happen someday. But this is what my father wrote about Edgar Cayce. And this occurred like during the 1930s, during the Great Depression. So my father says in his autobiography, times were hard and my father did not get his usual summer job teaching at the teacher's college. He was despondent and left home swearing that he was going to find some sort of job. He was gone a couple of weeks. My mother did not know where he was. She did not hear from him. Just over the state line in Selma, Alabama, lived a man named Edgar Cayce, who was getting some publicity as the sleeping prophet. My mother felt he must be an American Indian, as only they had this sort of talent. Anyway, she wrote him a letter asking about my dad. The letter he wrote back was, quote, "There is really no reason for me to answer this letter. By the time you get this, you will have heard from your husband. He will be teaching summer school in Jasper, Alabama," unquote. The letter from Dad came the day before the one that came back from Edgar Cayce. So that was my father's family's experience with Edgar Cayce. My general knowledge of Edgar Cayce, I mean, the sleeping prophet, he was the kind of psychic who would go into like a deep sleep-like trance and would prophesy, and he wouldn't remember what he was saying. People would have to tell him afterwards. So how he wrote the letter, I'm not sure. Because he was just that sort of psychic that goes into a deep trance and does not remember what he's saying, and then people would have to tell him afterwards. And sometimes they'd just be like ashen-faced in a state of mild shock. But he started with like medical diagnoses. I'm not exactly sure how he got started. I don't remember that part, at least with regard to his prophesying in this life. But he started with medical diagnoses, and he was like very successful in just, he'd go into the trance. Somebody would write him a letter. They didn't have texting back then. Somebody would write him a letter. He'd get the letter. He'd go into the trance. And then while he was in trance, he would like project his clairvoyant vision to that person. Sometimes he'd comment on like the pajamas they were wearing at the time that he was like looking at them. He's sort of like diagnosing their situation with like clairvoyance, allegedly. And then a lot of the treatments were, I mean, some of it was really simple, just avoid drafts, change your diet, this kind of stuff. And then a lot of the stuff was like experimental or controversial kind of stuff, but it worked. He'd be, like diagnosing some medicine that's usually used for something else, and he'd do it. He'd be like advising doctors on this sort of stuff, and they'd bring up objections. He just says, just go ahead and do it. And then it would work. A lot of electrical therapy. He was like prescribing that kind of stuff. But then later, after he got famous from the medical diagnoses, he started doing like more prophet-like stuff with regard to like reincarnation and also just prophecies of the future. And when he started getting into that, it seems to me that he was less reliable. Like one of his prophecies was that proof of, I think it was Atlantis, would be found by the end of the 20th century in one of the pyramids of Egypt. As far as I know, that didn't happen unless maybe there's like this big cover up. It's a conspiracy. He did make an interesting prophecy, though, that might come true, where he said that the final last bastion, the last stronghold of Christianity in the world would be Russia. And at the time, I mean, this was like Stalinist Soviet Union at the time, so it seemed like a wild prediction. But now it's starting to look more and more plausible, at least. And it's interesting to me that according to him, he had like a past life regression on himself, and he found out how he got this ability to like leave his body, have clairvoyant visions and so forth. And that was in a previous life, he supposedly was a soldier who was mortally wounded on a battlefield and just left for dead. And he was lying there for like 2 days before he finally died in just mortal agony. And it was just lying there hour after hour. Nobody's going to help you. You're surrounded by corpses. That he just somehow trained himself, over those excruciating many hours to just leave his body, so that he wouldn't be having to endure this. He could just go somewhere else while his body was slowly dying. So my general knowledge and opinion, I guess my general knowledge has just been conveyed for the most part. My opinion of the work of Edgar Cayce, I do think he was more reliable as like a medical healer, just for diagnosing and prescribing, the treatment for the ailments he's diagnosing, that sort of thing. But when he started getting into prophecies, he became less reliable. One of the things that he kept doing in his later years was like somebody would have a problem, he would say, it's because you did this in a previous life. And one of the things that people were really getting dinged on, they were getting bad karma for this, was going to like the Colosseum in Rome and watching like Christians or political criminals being fed to wild animals, torn apart by lions, that kind of stuff. And they'd be laughing and cheering while it was happening. And then so that would mess them up, mess up their karma, so that in their next life or several lives later, they're still having residual problems, karmic retribution over just laughing and jeering at people being ripped apart in the arena, especially like Christians. And I mean, if you can take Edgar Cayce seriously, then America pretty much is like the reincarnation of Rome. Because a lot of Americans, I mean, according to Edgar Cayce, lots and lots of us were in Rome too. It's just carrying over into America now. And it might be that we've got our Julius Caesar figure now. So let's see here. What else was I going to say? My general knowledge and opinion of the work of Edgar Cayce. Yeah, I do think he had genuine talent, definitely. Although his talk about Atlantis, I take with a grain of salt, because I got my own theory about Atlantis. I do think Atlantis is just a very garbled version of the so-called Minoan civilization. It's like the first mention of Atlantis is in one of the dialogues of Plato, where he's talking about how Atlantis was this great civilization that tried to conquer mainland Greece, and the mainland Greeks, led by the Athenians, fought them off. And if they were super high tech, then these Bronze Age Mycenaeans are not going to be able to defeat them in battle. But I mean, you could have the Minoan civilization trying to conquer mainland Greece and failing because these badass Mycenaeans who love to fight just fought them off and eventually conquered Crete. After, there was the explosion of the volcanic island of Thera, which didn't completely wipe out the Cretan civilization, but it caused tidal waves, which probably messed up their navy, coated the island of Crete in volcanic ash, which messed up their agriculture, weakened the civilization sufficiently that later on badass Mycenaeans were able to conquer it. So yeah, Edgar Cayce, I think he did have some legitimate psychic ability, psychic talent. What else? There was one other thing. No, I think that's it. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Stellar Supreme, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He adds new names, but let's just go with Stellar Supreme. Let's be conservative here, traditionalist, if you will. I guess we could call him Lieberlam because he was called that before he was Stellar Supreme. So anyways, Stellar Supreme, et cetera, Legion says, how would you translate the phrase left hand of the Supreme in Pali? Well, left hand is Vama Hata. Vama is left, Hata is hand. And just as a side note, the word for elephant, one of the main words for elephant in Pali is Hati, which means having a hand, which is the end of their trunk. So, I mean, Wamahata is pretty much straightforward. That's left hand. But the left hand of the Supreme, I mean, you could say the Supreme would be Brahma. Brahma could be translated as the Supreme. Then it would be Brahma Wamahata. But if you wanted to leave Brahma out of this and just say the ultimate, left hand of the ultimate, that would be like Paramata. Then it would be like Paramata Wamahata, which, I don't know, has kind of a ring to it. It sort of rhymes with itself. Paramata Wamahata or Wamahata. Yeah, I think left fist of the Supreme might be better though. But that's for Legion to decide for himself. And he says, let's see, Stellar Supreme, et cetera, also says, his next question, got any catchier Pali nicknames you recommend from my YouTube channel? And left fist of God, it's kind of interesting that the Burmese word for fist is let thee, which means hand fruit. But I mean, if I got to name myself rather than my preceptor naming me, I would have gone with the name of Muni Gosa. I like the name Muni Gosa because Muni is usually translated as sage. Gosa is like voice or shout. But Muni originally meant someone who undergoes a vow of silence. It's like a silent sage. Like in India, even today, like I think in Hindi, Maum just means taking a vow of silence. It just means being silent. So it can also mean shout of the silent one, which is sort of paradoxical, I suppose. But I like paradox. I really do. Paradox has been one of my lifelong passions, I guess. So let's see here. I should mention that not only did Stellar Supreme, but one other person asked transgressive fourth questions for this video, and I'm still of two minds whether I should even answer the fourth questions, because the limit is 3. The number of the count shall be 3, no more, no less. The count shall not be 4, nor shall it be 2, unless one then proceed to 3. So let's see, let's just do the third question though. Stellar Supreme, etc., says, would it be a bad idea to teach really serious, heavy Dhamma on my YouTube channel, considering women might see it? Considering I will make a public service announcement at the beginning of each video about how this content is exclusively intended for men. Well, I don't think you really need any kind of exclusionary public service announcement, because in all likelihood 95% at least of your viewers are going to be guys anyway. That's the way it works for me. I haven't looked at my YouTube stats in quite a while, but in the past, it was above 95% of all my viewers were male. So I mean, it's just kind of superfluous to say women shouldn't watch this. The He-Man Woman Haters Club, no girls allowed, that kind of thing. That's just superfluous. It's completely unnecessary, just asking for trouble. So, let's see, would it be a bad idea to teach really serious, heavy Dhamma? Well, I mean, are you qualified to teach really serious, heavy Dhamma? I mean, just the renunciation is pretty heavy all by itself. That's pretty straightforward. So I guess there are some relatively simple teachings of Dhamma that are still serious, heavy Dhamma. Let's see. So would it be a bad idea to teach really serious, heavy Dhamma on my YouTube channel, considering women might see it? No, I mean, yeah, I don't think that's really an issue. So I'm just going to move on to this transgressive fourth question. And yeah, I'm serious, you guys. You should count. And don't count higher than 4 when you're asking questions. And just count question marks. Don't count paragraphs. Count question marks. How many question marks are there? Because some people will just supposedly ask one compound question with like 4 question marks in it, distributed throughout the paragraph. So anyways, Liber Lamb, also known as Stellar Supreme, also known as fill in the blank, says, where I live locally is like a desert for non-normie lady partners as I see it. Yeah, and I'm considering relocating to Chiang Mai, Thailand, because it's like a social hub and it's cheap to live there. I figure that because it's a Buddhist country, there might be a devout Thai woman or Western woman who I could find there. Do you consider this a good plan, or would you recommend I try something else? I have a remote job lined up that pays around 50 or 60K per year in insurance sales to support this venture. Well, looking for the right girl. Thailand maybe is not optimal in my opinion. First of all, no offense to any Thai people watching this, but Thai women tend not to be very attractive, in that like a physiological sense. And also, I mean, if you're a big guy, with big hands and big feet, for example, Southeast Asian women are just too gracile. It's not going to be a good match physically. Let's just leave it at that. And just completely leaving out the fact that you're like banning women from watching your videos. So, I mean, if I were going to live in some exotic locale, just maybe with the hopes of meeting the right girl if I hadn't already met her, that kind of thing, then I think I'd prefer Ubud in Bali, despite the threat of the occasional devastating volcano in Indonesia. But Ubud there's lots of Ubudists there, a lot of Westerners there. It's sort of like an artist's colony there. A lot of rich people who just don't want to deal with Western craziness, prefer the milder form of Eastern craziness. They live in places like Ubud in Thailand, which is beautiful. So, let's see. Looking for a non-normie lady partner. I mean, the Stellar Supreme is pretty far. I mean, he's sort of on the fringe of non-normies. He's definitely liminal. And you might want to get yourself a normie female just to kind of ground you. I mean, Stellar Supreme asked this question, like in the previous Q&A, or a recent one anyhow, how can he be less liminal? Yeah, and finding like some female artist is not going to do it. I mean, you probably should get yourself maybe some nice conservative, like spinster school teacher lady in Thailand, that kind of thing. I used to think about that sort of thing, like when I was living in Burma, just settle down with some nice old maid school teacher lady, that kind of thing. But still, there would be a culture barrier, a language barrier. You couldn't really have, with most Burmese women, I would guess Thai women are kind of similar. They think a lot the same. There's not as much psychological variation. And so having like a stimulating conversation the odds would be lower than with a Western woman. Oh, let's see here. A good plan to move to Chiang Mai to find a woman. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Maybe, you're going to have to follow your own intuition on that one, I guess. But, if I were looking for a woman, I certainly wouldn't go to Thailand, just because Thai women in general, there are some really pretty ones, but they are a tiny minority. And you got to be careful, because a lot of the lady boys are prettier than the actual biological females. So don't get led astray by that. Might look into Ubud in Bali, though, if you want to live in some tropical paradise. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Xenothoid. And Xenothoid says, can you compare and contrast being made in the image of God in Christianity versus Atman is Brahman in Hinduism? They seem like adjacent concepts, although definitely not the same. Yeah, it's kind of weird. I never really thought to compare these two concepts before. There's sort of a crude spark of the Upanishads in this Christian idea or Jewish idea that man was made in the image of God. It doesn't, a lot of people, it may be even the original person who wrote that or who started that tradition had this idea of an anthropomorphic God, that we were just even looked like God, which is the way a lot of people think. But it may be something a little more profound. Made in the image of God is just sort of kind of a project. It's, in a way, I was thinking in the shower the other night that, it could be sort of even like a Platonic thing here, where as Christ would be like the ideal man living in like a Platonic heaven of ideals. He's the perfect man. And so all mere mortal humans, partake of that ideal essence of manhood coming from like the Superman Christ. That could be some sort of Platonic philosophy that found its way into Judaism and then Christianity. That's possible too. But still, it would be not as profound as the whole thou art that dvam asi of the Upanishads, where the soul or the Atman in Hinduism is just that aspect of like Brahman or God, ultimate reality, which just happens to be here. So from the Christian point of view, everyone has their own soul. And I don't think that Jesus would have argued against that. But in Hinduism, starting with the Upanishads or whatever the Upanishads were based on, that is lost to us, that the entire world shares one soul, that God is essentially the soul of the entire world. Every being in the world shares this same soul, which is God. So that's going farther than Christianity goes. And I'm not exactly sure what was originally the intention of the statement in the Bible. I assume it's in the Bible, probably Genesis, that man was created in God's image. It could be something just crude and primitive, that they had this idea that God was anthropomorphic, was just some man up in heaven. And then maybe like Greek Platonist types influenced Jews to think in terms of, some prototype, some ideal in heaven that then has, sort of pale reflections of that ideal that are down here in the meat puppet. So that's possible. But it could be a little bit more profound, and that we're made with like a spark of divinity, that kind of thing, that would get closer to the Hindu ideal, but still it doesn't go as far as thou art that in the Upanishads. And I think I'm just going to move on to Xenothoid's next question. Can you talk, and make sure we're recording here. Yeah, we've been recording for over 30 minutes. Xenothoid says, can you talk about how to stop chasing certainty and feeling like you always need reassurance that things are going properly? I am very high in trait neuroticism, and dealing with uncertainty in any form is very difficult for me. God, yeah, that's dealing with uncertainty in any form. If that's difficult for you, then yeah, you've got difficulties, because pretty much everything is uncertain. In fact, Ajahn Chah, there's books that indicate that Ajahn Chah interpreted like anatta, I think it was anatta, or was it anicca, impermanence, as just not sure. It's just uncertain. One of the three marks of existence, he interpreted it as just not sure. You cannot be sure about anything, really. And I've taken that to heart. I mean, even before I became, even before I heard of Ajahn Chah, it was like in the Bible, the New Testament, it's saying you shouldn't say you're going to go to such and such town and make such and such amount of money and then come back here. It's like, you don't know. You should say, God willing, if I don't die first, I'll do that. And I mean, I've really taken that to heart, even like just from reading the New Testament as like a teenager, just not sure, God willing, inshallah, because nothing is certain. Not even death and taxes are like absolute certain. They're getting up to like 100%, but still. So, I mean, just bear in mind that we're all literally infinitely ignorant. I mean, you can't really know what's going to happen. I mean, we're blind with regard to the future. We have sort of a murky vision towards the past, especially guys do. I've noticed that women have very adjustable memories, so they can remember something just radically different from what actually happened just 5 minutes after the fact. But we don't need to go there. Not that I'm offending very many women, because there's not very many that watch these videos. So let's see here. Stop chasing certainty. Yeah, and it's just something that, I mean, you may have to just get beaten over the head with it before it really changes, because if it's like a lifelong habit, then me saying a few sentences probably is not going to jolt you out of a lifelong habit. Feeling like you always need reassurance that things are going properly. Yeah, I mean, I don't take the opposite route of just assuming that things are going wrong. But I mean, you just have to just acknowledge you don't know and just leave it to providence. Just put yourself in the hands of Dhamma. Just offer yourself up to God, so to speak. You know better than I do. And just bear in mind, whatever happens is that's what is supposed to happen to you due to your own karma. Everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. It's sort of like a mantra that would just spontaneously arise in my mind from time to time. And it's been doing that for decades. Everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. It doesn't arise as often as it used to. But still, you just have to like have faith that, what's going to happen is what you need to happen, even if it's something you don't like. Because that's really what's going to happen. What's going to happen is exactly what you need to happen, for the sake of the fulfillment of your karma, even if it's something you don't like. So, there's no point in worrying about it. And worrying about the future is just kind of delusional anyway. All that exists from the Theravada Buddhist point of view is right now, the present moment. That's all that exists. Thinking about the future, worrying about the past, worrying about what's going on somewhere else. It's just be here now. And that's really the wisest route to take. I was talking about that, I think, in the previous Q&A where, if you're being really mindful, even if you have to think about the future or you have to think about the past, then you're noting, thinking about the future right now, you're thinking about the future right now, you're thinking about the past, that kind of thing. So you're still sort of rooted in the present moment. You're grounded in the present moment. But yeah, being a perfectionist, wanting to do the best job you can, wanting everything just so, that can have its good points. But like always needing reassurance that things are going properly. Usually, they're going properly from like a higher vantage point because you're getting exactly what you need through your karma. But it's not always going to be something that you desire, something that you feel comfortable with. So, you can just have faith in that. If you're a Christian, you could have faith in God. Inshallah. Of course, that's not Christian, is it? So, let's see here. Yeah, from the Buddhist point of view, probably your best method of dealing with that is just mindful noting. Whenever you are like worrying about the future or worrying, is this the best way it can be, or are things going right? Just note it, thinking, wondering, worrying, and just let it go. And just every time that arises, you just note it, just objectively with the philosophical detachment. And then when you just keep observing your own thoughts with philosophical detachment and mindfulness, it removes them of their momentum. You're not reinforcing it. So eventually the momentum becomes less. And then it stops being as much of a problem, although it may never entirely go away. So I think I'm just going to move on to Zenithoid's third question here, which is kind of similar, I think. How does one stop catastrophizing, always jumping to the worst possible outcome? I tend to do this a lot, even though I know I'm almost always wrong whenever my mind spins up a narrative of impending doom. Yeah, my sweetheart does that too. Just kind of always expecting the worst, or at least in some cases, expecting the worst. And it's really, that sort of thing is worse than, in my opinion, than just worrying, are things going okay? Because, just expecting the worst to happen helps the worst to happen. It's like if you have negative thoughts, you're creating negative karma. So, just a matter of common sense. Just remind yourself, if you're having these thoughts of expecting the worst, then it's actually increasing the odds that the worst really is going to happen. It's all generated by mind. So again, it's just kind of like a humble attitude of, I don't know. It's like, just have faith. And I've been like that my whole life, and it has served me rather well. Sometimes my sweetie she gets on my case because I trust people too much, this kind of thing. I just don't take precautions because, I just give the human race the benefit of the doubt, even though I don't have an extremely high opinion of the human race. Still, it's do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, and just give people the benefit of the doubt, and just kind of have faith in your own karma, have faith in Dhamma to protect you, that kind of thing. have faith in your guardian angel, maybe. And it has served me pretty well. I mean, I've never really been screwed over. Not that I can think of. I mean, it has happened from time to time to some degree, but still I've generally been pretty lucky. I remember one time when I was a teenager, I've probably told this story before, that I had these pants that were in style back then and had no back pockets at all. And the front pockets went in like sideways, so that I had my wallet in my front pocket because I didn't have a back one. And I'm walking home from school and it falls out of my pocket 3 times while I'm walking home from school this one time. And every single time somebody picked up the wallet and came running after me to hand it to me. You dropped your wallet. I remember one time, it was like the last day of finals, like my sophomore year of college. I went to this party and just got blasted. That was the most I've ever drank in my life, I think. It was like more than half of a half gallon of vodka went down my gullet that night, I'm pretty sure. And I wound up passed out in the back of my car. And the next day, I couldn't find my shoes or my wallet. And I had just cashed a scholarship check. I had like $2,000 in my wallet. And I go into the house where everyone is passed out. And there it is. My wallet's just sitting there on like an end table with $2,000 still in it. It still had all the money in it. So I have been fortunate in life, partly just because I'm not always expecting the worst and therefore helping to draw in the worst from happening. I mean, you should be cautious and prudent. You shouldn't just, there's like a Burmese saying, don't trust in your karma and walk on thorns. It's like that kind of thing. I mean, you shouldn't just flirt with disaster. I mean, you should have some common sense. But still, I mean, Dhamma will protect you. If you have respect for Dhamma, Dhamma will protect you. And that kind of translates into Christianity as, you have faith in God. God loves you and, God will watch over you, that kind of thing. But again, I mean, if you catastrophize, same thing as the previous question, just mindfully note it and let it go. Catastrophizing, just note it and let it go. Just observe it objectively as just a mental phenomenon. It's arising. It's not you. If you are anything, you're the one doing the observing, not the thing being observed. So just note it and let it go. And then eventually it helps to weaken the habit. But it may be that, we are governed by habit. And habit energy is essentially what karma is. So we're governed by our own karma to some degree. It's like an automatic pilot because we're not fully conscious. We just have these habit patterns that just drive us through life like an automatic pilot. And so sometimes it takes a crisis. Sometimes it may take just the shit hitting the fan on like a biblical scale before it knocks enough sense into us or puts us into enough of a crisis that we're able to let go of these habits of generating this really imperfect samsara for ourselves. Because we'll cling to it. I mean, it's just human nature, and it's the nature of higher vertebrates too, including dogs. That you just cling to this habit pattern that has been getting you through life, even if you're just messed up and unhappy. So long as it's getting you through life, that's good enough, and we just cling to these habits. And sometimes it takes a real crisis of just shit hitting the fan before you can just let go and reach out for something better. And of course, that's what like Chinese thought reform was based on, and like Stalinist Russian interrogation techniques, and like some of the more rigorous basic training in the military and manhood rituals in like indigenous populations, and even some meditation retreats are like this, where it's just so difficult to deal with that you have like a breakdown, and then you can be born again. You can just let go of these habits that were like practically ruining your life and reach out for something better. Or in the case of like Chinese thought reform, you let go of your old like individualist kind of ideas and you just reach out to the communism that is being told to you by the commissar or whatever. So mindful detachment is about the best sort of low impact thing you can do. Just try and talk some sense to yourself. But in many cases, I am sorry to say that in order for there to be like real significant spiritual advancement, there has to be some kind of crisis that like causes it to happen. And I read that in a Ram Dass book when I was a teenager, and just for many years, I was just hoping that he was wrong on that one. But my own history seems to bear it out. Like the 2 or 3 main growth spurts spiritually I have experienced in my life have been the result of some kind of like emotional crisis. In fact, for a while, I was even trying to just trigger an emotional crisis in myself to try and spur on some emotional or some spiritual growth. But that's really playing with fire when you're doing that. And I guess I should just go on to the next question here. This is from Thought Fog. And Thought Fog says, I'm about to go on Ango Zen training for 3 months. Do you have advice? Well, just try and be at your peak. Try to be free of diseases, free of like worries. You've got like some, you try and like settle anything that's hanging in the air before you go there, so you're not going to be worrying about it. Just do your best. Just be in the present moment. That's the best you can do. So, there's really not much preparation for going on a 3-month intensive retreat, other than just, get your affairs in order and be as healthy as you can. Healthy in mind and body, especially mind. Although mind and body tend to interact with each other. And so it's hard to be perfectly healthy with one and not perfectly healthy in the other. So, yeah, just do your best and just put yourself wholeheartedly into it. That would be my advice. Just do your best. And I'll move it on to Thought Fog's next question here. Would you please talk more about Ajahn Punnadhammo? And I really don't know the Venerable Ajahn very well. We've done a few videos with Brian Rue, and Ajahn Punnadhammo got some severe pushback from at least a few of his supporters for having anything to do with Brian Rue, because Brian Rue has some rather politically incorrect ideas, which he holds sincerely. He's honest, and he's a good guy and a better Buddhist than a lot of people that would be spitting on him in the street. But aside from that, I had like an ill-starred video conference with him last week, which at his end, the internet was just messing up big time, and he just kept freezing. It was like half the time he was frozen until he just suggested we just give it up, which we did. I think he was like some kind of electrical engineer or something before he became a monk. He's intelligent, he's intellectually oriented with regard to a lot of things. He's written books. Because he's an ordained monk, he's probably more diplomatic and maybe a little more faith-oriented with regard to some of the teachings of Dhamma than I am. Even when I was a monk, I could just sort of make fun of Abhidhamma, for example, or some of the teachings of the commentarial tradition, just bring up this sort of embarrassing facts about what is in the text, that sort of thing, that most monks, including Ajahn Punnadhammo, generally don't do, largely just as a matter of sort of diplomacy and etiquette and that kind of thing. Because if you're trying to spread Dhamma to the West, you're not going to be, at least most monks won't be like bringing up embarrassing facts about what they're trying to promote, which is natural. But he seems like a genuinely good person. I do have a lot of respect for Ajahn Punnadhammo, but I really don't know him very well. He supposedly, the legend was that he lived in Canada up near Hudson's Bay somewhere, but actually I think he lives closer to Lake Superior than Hudson's Bay. So that was just a myth. And really, I don't know all that much about him, so there's not really much for me to say, I guess. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Scudamane. I think that's how you pronounce the name. Scudamane. Probably got picked on a lot in school when he was a kid. A name like that. And he says, how do you deal with pride In America, pride is seen as such a positive emotion, so much that if you don't have pride in something, you're looked at as ungrateful or foolish. Everywhere you look, there are pride union signs or proud dad shirts. My wife often asks me when our sons do something new or skillful, aren't you proud of them? It's hard for me to overlook pride as being actually negative in almost every major religion. How can you be happy with oneself or others without attaching pride? Well, yeah, I mean, pride usually in Pali would be mana, conceit. That's in Burmese also. The word for like someone who's very proud is mana jita. He's got big mana. So yeah, pride. It's not good in Buddhism because, of course, pride is just like this glorification of the self, and the self is delusional. It doesn't really exist. Also, of course, it's one of the 7 deadlies in traditional Christianity. Although I read somewhere like Western civilization has turned all of the 7 deadly sins into virtues except one, which is sloth. Sloth is still, sloth is sort of making a comeback. Even sloth is getting up there when, it's like, especially the left is like glorifying people who are just living on welfare handouts and not working for a living, that sort of thing. They're seen as just poor victims of the system or whatever. So even sloth, I guess, is rising in the estimation of many people in the West. So let's see. How do you deal with pride? I don't know. Other people might see me very differently, but I don't consider myself to be a particularly proud person. I may not be an extremely humble person either. Humility is definitely more of a virtue than pride, but it's sort of like related to the questions asked earlier, dealing with like best case scenarios or worst case scenarios or catastrophizing and all that. I just kind of leave it a blank. And it still surprises me a lot when people that I'm not even very nice to sometimes, like people at work, like apparently genuinely like me. It's like they think that I'm, out of the ordinary or whatever. And I guess I would agree that I'm out of the ordinary, but still, like even when I was a kid, like a girl would like me, a pretty girl would like me. And I would just not get it. Why? Why me? That kind of thing. But yeah, pride is something that I really don't have much rapport with pride. Like at work, you can get pride points. And it just the idea of like working to get pride points, it just seems silly. This pride, it does seem silly to me. And most proud people, the pride comes first. It's just like a character trait. And then it's just convenient justification for the pride comes later. And if they can't be proud of being handsome or rich or intelligent or, in great physical shape, they'll be proud of how many beers they can drink without puking or how many women they've seduced or, how big their feet are or just anything. The pride comes first as a general rule. And, I don't know, some people might think that I'm just a stuck-up prick or something, but at least at the conceptual, intellectual level, I can't really relate to it very much, just being proud. Aren't you proud of him? Yeah, it's like, I think in Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, like the wholesome alternative to being proud of somebody would be mudita, which is one of the 4 Brahma Viharas, one of the 4 divine abidings. And mudita is being happy that someone else is happy. You're glad that someone has had good fortune. It's just like a sympathetic joy. You feel happy because this person that you like is happy. It's sort of like you give a present to somebody and they really like it, that makes you happy. Or, the grandma who's making banana bread and the little kids are all just hopping up and down, they like it so much, then that makes grandma feel happy. And she's not proud of them for eating the banana bread, but she's happy because they're happy. It's just sort of like this contagious happiness. So, I mean, that would be fine. Your sons do something new or skillful and you praise them. That's one thing that a lot of parents don't get, I think. I mean, I shouldn't be giving advice to parents very much because I'm not a parent myself. At least I'm unaware of being one. But it's like, you don't just punish them when they do something bad. I mean, sometimes that's necessary, but you also praise them and reward them when they do something good. And I mean, you don't necessarily have to be proud. I mean, it can happen. I mean, if I had kids, I might be proud of my kids if they did something good. Come home with straight A's or something. And yeah, you'd sort of praise them, be glad about it, maybe brag. Like my father, he used to brag about me to his brothers and sisters sometimes. I'd come home with like some scholarship or something, and he'd immediately go to the phone and brag to his sister about how smart his kid was. And kids really eat that stuff up. When your own parents are like bragging about you, they don't even know you're listening. You're like listening in the other room about that, your dad bragging about you. Then yeah, that makes a kid feel really good. But I mean, you can do that without actual pride. You praise your kids when they do good and just be happy that your kids are good instead of bad, largely for their own good. I mean, you want your kids to be good people and not bad people. You want them to, be productive, well-balanced members of society and not just, drug addicted, troublemakers. So, I mean, you can, have happiness when your kids do well without being proud about it. And pride, it's a kind of egoism, because that's really what mana is in Pali. It's sort of literally the literal translation of mana in Pali is measuring. So someone who's proud is sort of measuring themselves against somebody else. And in the Atthakavagga, it even goes so far as to say that if you consider yourself to be superior to another, that's mana. That's pride or conceit. If you consider yourself to be inferior to someone, that's also conceit. And if you consider yourself to be equal to someone else, that's also conceit, because in every single case, you're measuring yourself up against somebody else. Just measuring yourself up. That's essentially what mana is. And if you measure yourself up way bigger than somebody else, that would be what is called pride in the West. And, just essentially it's a feeling of being superior. So how do I deal with it? I see it in other people, and then it's just kind of, I don't know, just kind of embarrassing, I guess, if they're really extreme about it. But I don't see it a lot. I mean, I usually deal with humble working class people if I'm dealing with other people at all, at least, in the outside world. My sweetheart doesn't seem to be extremely proud. I don't strike myself as being particularly proud of a human being. I mean, humility is something I admire in others. The people at work that I tend to like the most are humble people. They're just unassuming, not bragging. The guy that works next to me, he's like overseeing the section next to mine. He's bragging a lot, trying to be a hot shot. And I mean, I can like him anyway, but still, it's not as likable as the guy who works on the other side of me, who, I mean, to some degree, he'll even go into like self-deprecation, which I don't like. It's like I can like say, hey, stop bad-mouthing my friend, when he's saying something bad about himself. But yeah, I mean, pride may be hard to see in oneself, which is maybe why I don't see much in myself. But I mean, again, the standard, the panacea in Theravada Buddhism for any kind of unskillful mental state is mindfully note it. Note it and let it go. Do not identify with it. Don't just, get carried away by it. Just observe it with emotional detachment. It's just a mental state that's arising, and let it go. But you have to do that perpetually, because you can't just do it 2 or 3 times and then forget about it and then expect this problem to be solved, because it won't be. And I'm just going to move on to Scudamane's next question, which is, do people have a duty, specifically in the West where population decline is occurring and possibly to dangerously low levels, to have offspring? Follow-up question, which still is only 3. Follow-up question. Would things like homosexuality or even becoming a monk, being a reproductive dead end, be negative in a way? So I guess I'll just have to separate this, make an extra question, and deal with it after I deal with the first question. Do people have a duty to have offspring? Okay, no, from the Buddhist point of view, no, it doesn't matter. I mean, even if the human race died out, which it isn't going to do, but even if we just like stopped reproducing until we went extinct, I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, it wouldn't really matter. Not that it's going to happen, because Buddhism predicts that humans are just going to be on this earth for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I mean, you can, like, from a sort of a ethnocentric point of view, say, well, you know, the white race, you know, the European ethnicity or group of ethnicities is dwindling dangerously, so we should reproduce, you know, better to have one white child than curse the dark ones, that kind of thing. But I mean, from an ethical point of view, no. It has nothing to do with ethics. It's just a matter of more politics or sociology than ethics. So you don't have a duty to have kids. And that's kind of lucky for me, because when I was younger, first of all, from the age of like 17, I was planning on renouncing the world and becoming a monk. So, I mean, I wasn't really planning on having a family. But even if I hadn't become a monk, back then, like back in the 1980s, late 70s and 80s, I mean, there's always this end of the world hysteria going on. You know, climate change is one of the most recent ones, that the technological singularity might be a more realistic one. Back in the 70s and 80s, it was, we had the ozone layer, but that would be survivable. You know, we'd all just be wearing hazmat suits and we go outside, slathering ourselves with, you know, an eighth of an inch of zinc or something. But still, there was like thermonuclear Armageddon, which is still a possibility. It's really weird to me how that was just like, you know, the big thing. That was the danger, the threat to the world was World War III, thermonuclear Armageddon, and even more countries have nukes now. And the Cold War, it's like the powers that be, the upper establishment, doesn't want to get rid of a Cold War. So, I mean, it's still a danger now, but for some reason, you know, it's like the propagandists just say, you know, they're just, you know, they got some other shiny thing that they're saying, here, be freaked out about this. And then, of course, there was overpopulation. Like back in the 70s, it was, we're going to just overpopulate. There's just, by the 20th century, it's just going to be just famine and billions of people starving to death, which, of course, hasn't happened. And even with regard to like the white ethnicity, the European family of ethnicities, or whatever you want to call it, Caucasians, I mean, we're not going to die out, because what's happening is the sort of the decadent effete people, mostly leftists, they're not reproducing, but the conservatives, like Amish people, are still reproducing like bunnies. And so what's going to happen is leftism may die out, but conservatism is going to grow. And that's why, one reason, I suppose, why the left has this strategy of just trying to convert the children, like in, you know, schools that are really like indoctrination camps. Just, you know, they're not having their own kids, so they got to convert somebody else's kids to become the next generation of leftists. But it doesn't work very well. Like the Shakers, I don't know if there's any Shakers left. It was a Christian sect in America, and celibacy was just mandatory for Shakers, and so they just died out. But I mean, it may be that the future is for, in Western civilization, maybe for like Mormons and Amish people, that sort of thing. Let's see here. But people do not really have a duty, at least not from an unethical duty from a Buddhist point of view, to have children. In fact, it's kind of the other way around. You know, you're better off not having kids from a Buddhist point of view, or from the point of view of the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. Because in a way, you're sort of damning somebody to one of the relatively more comfortable levels of hell. But, I mean, it's their karma. They're going to get born anyway. So, yeah, you do not have a duty to have offspring. So I'm moving on to Scudamane's third question here, the follow-up question on the second one. Would things like homosexuality or even becoming a monk being a reproductive dead end, be negative in a way? It could be negative in like an evolutionary point of view, not ethically though. I mean, homosexuality, you could say from a Buddhist point of view, that's an ethical problem just because lust is a problem. Whether it's lust for a woman or lust for a man or lust for anything else, it's still lust, and it's to that extent, it's craving, which is the cause of all suffering, and you're better off without it. But most people just aren't, and the Buddha was cool with that. He just acknowledged. Jesus of Nazareth apparently was the same way. Just not everybody's ripe for it. So those who are ready, here's the teachings. And the rest of you, well, follow as well as you can, if you please. Even to follow it a little bit is better than not following it at all. But I remember Eckhart Tolle, I think in his first famous book, talked about homosexuality and said that in certain ways, homosexuals can actually have an advantage simply because they're kind of on the margins. They're more liminal than just an ordinary heterosexual person. So in a way that kind of helps them to be a little bit more detached from samsara, at least potentially in some cases. But of course, in other cases, there are homosexual men that are just like completely depraved and have had over 1,000 sexual partners and go to anonymous orgies and all this kind of stuff. So it depends on the individual and the individual's mental states. But just being like an evolutionary dead end is not ethically negative. I mean, the Buddha himself was an evolutionary dead end. According to tradition, he had only one child, his son Rahula, and then he ordained his son Rahula as a monk, and he became celibate. And so, the Gautama clan has pretty much become extinct. At least those nobody is descended from the Buddha. Millions and millions of people are descended from Genghis Khan, but nobody is descended from the Buddha now. Or maybe from Jesus. That's kind of, it may be that Jesus did have kids. There's no mention of them in the Bible, of course, but it's still possible. But then again, even the Buddha may have sown some wild oats. I mean, he had a harem of beautiful girls living in the palace with him. So maybe one of them became the mother of a nation. Who knows? But I mean, if being a reproductive dead end is negative in a way, it's not an ethical way. It's more of like if you're like a Darwinist or something, evolutionary biologist, then it could be seen as something that is not optimal. Or like a white nationalist or something like that. But ethically, it's fine. Now I'm moving on to the next question. This is from Maitreya Buddha. And Maitreya Buddha asks kind of an interesting question that I'm not fully equipped to answer, I'm sure. He says, how would you describe the change in consciousness of Siddhartha Gautama, almost dying from starvation, being approached by a young girl offering a bowl of milk rice, to Siddhartha Gautama meditating at the base of the Bodhi tree and becoming a Buddha and coming up with a middle path? And I wrote an essay long ago, back before I started blogging. This was just written on paper, the way Fred Flintstone used to write his philosophical essays. And I had this, it's like a hypothesis. And I'm mainly going to answer this question hypothetically, in that it's fairly common in Christianity, for example, where a person is trying to be a good person. They're trying to live up to the ideals of the Bible, of the New Testament especially, because the ideals of the Old Testament aren't particularly high. But he's trying to, serve God, do God's will, and he just can't do it. So finally, he hits this crisis, the kind of crisis I was mentioning earlier, where it's like, I just can't do it, God. I just offer myself up to you. I'm entirely, I'm your grace. If I go to heaven, it's going to be entirely your grace. I just throw myself at your mercy. And in a way, they just kind of give up. And when that happens, it's like they've had that crisis and they're just born again. And that happened to me to some degree when I was a monk. After I've been a monk about 10 years, it was like I'm just struggling against my own defilements. It's like trying to like ruthlessly eradicate your own imperfections, and it just doesn't work that way. Maybe if you have absolute stainless steel faith like some kind of medieval Roman Catholic saint, maybe then. But some eclectic Westerner, 20th century Westerner at the time, early 21st century Westerner, trying to perfect yourself through your own efforts. You just hit a wall at some point or another. And then it's like you just give up. It's like the great surrender. You just surrender. It's just, I can't do it. It's Buddhism kind of accepts this. And so Christianity really accepts it. They say, the only way you're going to go to heaven is through the divine grace. But in Buddhism, it's like, there's no guarantees. And really, you perfect yourself through mindful detachment. Just, you're not trying to eradicate unskillful mental states so much as just whatever arises, you just note it and let it go. You just don't feed it, don't reinforce it. And then just whatever is supposed to happen happens, and you can just accept that. So getting back to the Buddha, I think it's possible as a hypothesis that he tried everything that was available in the spiritual tradition of India at the time. He mastered, the meditative states, still wasn't enlightened. Then he started torturing himself, like the Jains and the Ajivikas were doing, and that wasn't working either. He almost died because of that. And so finally, it could be that he just had this crisis or just this surrender. It's like, that's not working. Nothing works. This woman is offering me some good food. I'm just going to sit down, eat the food, and then just meditate. And it may be that that's what happened. According to tradition, he made this resolve. I'm not going to get up from this tree until I become fully enlightened. But that's really not the way it works, in my opinion. It may be that it was like he had tried everything, tried as hard as he could. He was like the spiritual genius anyway. He was trying at a very advanced level. Still nothing was working. So it's like there was just like this, something clicked or snapped, and it was just like this state of supreme spiritual surrender where he just stopped trying and he was there. That's all it takes. The struggle is one of the things that is keeping you from being enlightened. Even this struggle against your own defilements keeps you defiled. Because struggling against something just makes it stronger in a way. So the change in consciousness of Siddhartha Gautama, almost dying from starvation, being approached by a young girl, offering a bowl of milk rice, and then him meditating at the base of the Bodhi tree and becoming a Buddha. Yeah, trying to second guess the mental states of a Sambuddha is just ridiculous. So the best I'm going to do is just offer that up as just like this hypothesis, this sort of like a thought experiment that really he just tried as hard as he could, and nothing was working. And so this woman offers him some good food, milk rice, better food than he was eating at the time. He just, all right, I'm just going to eat it. And, I won't say that he just thought like, fuck it. But still, he just relaxed. He stopped struggling against his defilements, stopped struggling to become enlightened. And it was like he had already eradicated all of his other attachments. The only attachment he had left was the attachment to becoming enlightened. And then at the end, just through this supreme surrender, he just abandoned even that attachment, and there he was, fully enlightened. I'm not insisting that's the way it happened, but that is like a hypothesis I offer for consideration. And I'm going to move on to Maitreya Buddha's next question here. How would you describe the transition of the consciousness of the Buddha dying and entering parinirvana? Well, I should have looked up the let's see, Parinibbana Sutta, which is the sutta in the Digha Nikaya that describes the Buddha's final days and, his death and everything. But the transition of consciousness, according to tradition, is he was having these racking pains, these abdominal pains, after eating some bad pork, or some people nowadays, some doctors are saying it's an ailment common to, not extremely common, but it happens mainly with very elderly people, where they start getting like gangrene of the intestinal tract. It's just like their body is starting to just die from the inside out. And that can be extremely painful. They think maybe that's what the Buddha had, and it wasn't really some kind of bad pork that he ate. But anyways, the Buddha was in intense racking pain. And so according to the tradition, he went into jhana. First jhana, then second jhana, then third jhana, then fourth jhana, which originally was the highest jhana. But then by the time this text had reached its completed form, he went into like the formless jhanas. And then he may have even gone into a higher like Nirodha Samapati or something, which is even higher than the highest jhana. And then he came back down to first jhana and then went back up to fourth jhana again and then died in fourth jhana. And it could be that traditionally he died in fourth jhana because fourth jhana was as high as it went in the Buddhist time. And then after these Indian systematizers added extra jhanas and everything, they had to sort of modify the story so that he went into all these higher jhanas too. But then, in a certain amount of like faithfulness to the original version of the story, he had to go back to first jhana and then just went as far as fourth jhana and died in fourth jhana, because at least in some suttas, fourth jhana is like the traditional jumping off point for nibbana. But the transition of consciousness of the Buddha dying and again, it's second guessing the mental states of the Buddha, but according to tradition, he was in very deep meditative states when he died. So, non-verbal, just very subtle. His consciousness was just, a flat calm, no kind of distracting perceptions or thoughts or ideas or anything. He wasn't talking or anything. He wasn't thinking in words, probably. He just went into like a deep meditative state, just kind of blissed out and just faded out from there. That would be my guess, just based on tradition, because that's all we really have to work with. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Romeo. And Romeo says, my questions are about the practical logistics of working out one's karma in this life. I'm confused about how one differentiates between a general difficult life issue that comes with simply being a human being living in samsara and an issue connected specifically to one's karma. Well, it's all specifically connected to your karma, because it's your karma that you're born into as a human being into the human condition. So even just the basic things of the human condition, feeling hungry sometimes, even that is karma. It's just that you have like predominantly human karma at the time. At least that's what's at the surface, working its way out. So a general difficult life issue that comes with simply being a human being is in samsara is still karma. Anything that you experience, according to Abhidhamma, any vedana that you have, any feeling that you have, is necessarily the fruition of karma. It's kama vipaka. So absolutely every feeling that you experience is the fruition of kama. And it's like your own mental states. And that's, just the fact that, being a human, the fact that you were born a human in the first place is also because of kama. And then you stub your toe, that's because of kama. You feel hungry, that's because of kama. Get a toothache, that's because of kama also. Because it's all mind-made. So let's see here. Yeah, there is no differentiation at all. Any feeling that you experience, pleasant or unpleasant, is the fruition of your own kama or karma. Sort of like Schopenhauer's will, that's just the driving force of all beings, anything in existence in samsara. It's a manifestation of this will. And that's what karma is. I mean, karma is very similar to Schopenhauer's will. So, yeah, there is no differentiation between your karma and then what you just inherit as part of the human condition, because what you inherit as part of the human condition is also karma. So I'm just going to move on to Romeo's next question. He says, also, what is the practical method of working out a karmic issue, and how can one tell if or when the karmic issue is resolved? Feel free to cite examples from your own life to illustrate the answers to my questions. Well, I mean, you don't even worry about it. You just be here now, be here in the present moment. Don't worry about whether some karmic issue is resolved. So, I mean, if it just doesn't arise anymore, then there's a good chance it's resolved, especially if it has had opportunities to arise, but hasn't. So a practical method of working out a karmic issue, I mean, the standard panacea is just whatever arises, note it and let it go. Just be mindful of whatever arises with a certain amount of mindful detachment. That's the best you can do, because that means your karma is, I mean, your past karma is reaching fruition, but you're not reacting to it, thereby creating more karma. So if something can arise and you have no reaction to it, you're not even drawn to having a reaction, that would be a pretty good indication that the karmic issue is resolved. I mean, if something used to bother you, or something used to elicit some kind of positive or negative reaction, and now it doesn't anymore, then, I mean, it could be you're just too old, but there is also a chance that it's just worked itself out, that through whatever wisdom you've got, whatever mindfulness you've got, that it just ran its course and it's no longer there. It could be, I mean, some karma, if we go with Buddhist philosophy, it can just be a one-off. It's like you had this karma to have somebody ram your car at one point, and I mean, maybe you had some philosophical detachment from that. Even if you did have some, you had some emotional reaction or whatever. I mean, at least the main brunt of the karma has exhausted itself, and then there's just going to be some sort of like side effect karma that comes from your reaction to having your car smashed or something. So, practical method of working out a karmic issue, just follow the middle path. Don't seek pleasure, don't seek pain. Just live your life, and whatever's going to happen to you, it happens, and then you just don't react. Or, I mean, if you even get a second chance, even if you do react, if you react mindfully, let's say you have aversion, but you note the aversion, then still you got that second chance, and still you're doing okay. But just being lost in samsara and just reacting with positive or negative, attraction and aversion and so forth, just throughout life, yeah, you're just wallowing in it, and you're not. Karmic issues are going to be new ones will be created at about the same rate as you're like resolving the older ones. So just having a certain mindful detachment from it all, so that whatever arises, you're not going to be like attached and having some strong reaction. Then that's about the best you can do. And it doesn't even really matter if the karmic issue is resolved, because, I mean, even a fully enlightened Buddha, according to Theravada Buddhist tradition, I mean, all of his karma is not resolved. It's like stuff is still happening to him. Mahamoggallana, one of the two chief disciples, was beaten to death, just beaten into a pulp by hostile non-Buddhists. I mean, there's still karma there. It's just that when you become enlightened, you're just not reacting anymore. It's just you're not attached to any of it. It's just nature taking its course. And that can just keep happening even after you become fully enlightened. So don't even bother trying to figure out if some karmic issue is resolved. I mean, if the issue just doesn't arise anymore, or if it does arise and you just completely cool with it, It's no surge of attraction or surge of aversion. It's just equanimity. Then there's a good chance it's resolved. But still, you shouldn't latch onto it's resolved or it's not resolved, because it doesn't even really matter. You can't really be sure anyway, as far as I can tell. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Jimmy Ladd. And Jimmy Ladd says, you spoke a few episodes ago about how you didn't fully attain jhana. For a certain period you would attain it, but then it would slip away and it kept eluding you. I know it is impossible to describe these higher states, but what was it like and how did it feel to momentarily attain jhana? And again, jhana is such a controversial term, with nobody really fully agreeing with everybody else on what exactly jhana means. Originally, jhana probably just meant meditation. And the 4 jhanas were just the 4 stages or 4 levels of meditation, with first jhana even being like beginning level. You're meditating correctly. It's just that you still have like a primary object in your labeling or whatever, because you're still thinking in first jhana. So I consider the term jhana to be almost useless, to tell you the truth. And then people would have monkeyed with it, for centuries after the Buddha started using the term. But when I was in my highest meditative states, and I've explained this before, it's like your mind is just, it's like I mentioned earlier, it's like your mind is just a flat calm. It's like the surface of a clear pool. And a thought might start to arise, but it's like a fish arising from down below, and you can start seeing the ripples on the surface before the fish even comes to the surface. And then your mindfulness is so acute that it just, as soon as you become aware of it, it just flattens back out again. And you're just sitting there in just clarity and silence. It's like your mind is clear like glass and you're not thinking anything, which has caused me to think that the closest that most normal people get to jhana, less like higher jhanic states, would be when they're in the middle of a sneeze, when you're wide awake and you're not thinking anything. So yeah, when you're in a state like that, where your mind is just a flat calm, it's just, you're hyper alert, because you're catching, you're aware of thoughts even when the first movements start to arise, and then it just stops. It's just clarity and silence and just wide awake consciousness. And you can sit like that for over an hour. And it might be a thought will start to arise, but it's not like absolute perfect silence, but it's like the clarity is there and the silence will start to be disrupted a little bit, but you don't just follow up on it. You don't just get lost in this chain of association. It may be that occasionally even a full thought, like a word or something, will arise, but you just don't follow it. You just note it, let it go, or you don't even really note it. You're just aware of it without even having to note. So you're seeing without looking. It's not volitional really. And your mind is just, it's just wide awake and clear like glass. And I really do not think that somebody who's going into like a state like a hibernating squirrel, where they're oblivious to everything around them, that is some sort of sama samadhi, like some higher jhanic state, which a lot of people think. It's just accepted nowadays by the mainstream of Theravada Buddhism. You get into 4th jhana, it's like you stop breathing and your pulse rate is down like hibernating squirrel levels. And you're just completely oblivious to everything around you. And like, how is that higher consciousness? How are you getting closer to being awake when you're practically in a coma? But I do think that a jhanic state is like hyper aware. You're at a higher level of awakeness than an ordinary waking state of consciousness, even though you may be sitting motionless in a cave somewhere. And I guess I'm just going to move on to Jimmy Ladd's next question. Is there a word in Buddhism, in Pali, for a state that is only partially realized and has been glimpsed but not fully conquered and attained? And there may be. I'm sure there's words in Pali that just mean like, just glimpsed or just like incomplete. Certainly there's going to be words in Pali that mean like incomplete, not fully mastered yet. Or like, the seikha is someone who is still in training. That would be like the lower three stages of ariya-hood. Sotapanna, sakadagami, anagami, they would be seikha because they're still in training. So their enlightenment has been glimpsed but not fully conquered and attained. So, I mean, in different contexts with regard to different things, I'm sure there's Pali terms that would indicate that it's not fully mastered but still incomplete. But with regard to jhana, like in the Gautika Sutta, where Gautika gets jhana and loses it and gets it and loses it and gets it and loses it till he's at wit's end and finally decides to self-delete, that I don't think there is a special word that applied to his jhana saying that he had not fully mastered it. In fact, I never really came across that concept until I was reading the works of Saint John of the Cross, who was a Roman Catholic, a contemplative, discalced Carmelite Catholic monk. And I mean, he said something that was humbling to me, where he's talking about the different stages. What a Catholic calls high contemplation, a Buddhist would call a higher jhana. So he's saying that for a contemplative monk to like get into the levels of contemplation where you're not thinking anymore and then lose it and then gain it and then lose it and gain it and lose it, based on his experience as like a father confessor at like meditation monasteries, he said, well, God just has different plans for you. And that was humbling to me. It's like, damn, he's not saying that there's hope really. He's just saying that, I mean, if you're that kind of a person where you get it and lose it and get it and lose it, you don't just fully master it. It's where you can just reliably sit down and go into these higher states, which some people do. Apparently the Buddha did that. That, it's just, you still haven't fully mastered it. So it's not reliable, at least not for very long. Then he's just saying, well, God has other plans for you. Because that was apparently his experience just as a father confessor at what were essentially meditation monasteries and meditation convents. He was a father confessor to nuns too. So, yeah, I'm sure there are certain specific Pali words for states that are partially realized, like seikha, with regard to just the state of being in samsara, the state of unenlightenment. But, yeah, I don't think that there is really a technical term that you can just attach as an adjective to, or an adverb to another word, which indicates that you haven't fully mastered it yet. You've got glimpses of it. You're getting there, but you haven't fully mastered it yet. It may be, I'm no authority on the Pali language. I'm certainly no philologist, no bhikkhu bodhi when it comes to understanding the Pali language. So there may be a word, but I don't know what it would be. And I'm going to move on to the next question. This is from Cherzaskaziz. And Cherzaskaziz says, are you obliged to eat everything people put in your bowl in alms round? And then some wise guy said that there's the mandatory story of the severed finger, which is in the Therigatha. It's Mahakassapa, who was senior monk in the Sangha after the Buddha at the time of the Buddha's parinibbana. And he was the great disciple who had mastered Dhutanga, or ascetic practice. And there's a story about how this leprous beggar puts food into Mahakassapa's bowl, and one of his fingertips just breaks off into Mahakassapa's bowl. And Mahakassapa, he doesn't raise an eyebrow, just total poker face, complete equanimity. He just accepts the severed finger in the bowl along with the rice or whatever it was. And then when he goes and sits down to eat his meal, he doesn't even take it out. He just kind of moves it over to one side. Technically, it would have been against the rules for him to eat it because monks are not allowed to eat human flesh. But you're not obliged to eat everything people put in your bowl. I mean, for starters, of course, people can put something in your bowl that's just not allowable. Lion meat, for example. Of course, it's also a rule that monk is supposed to ask if anyone puts meat into the bowl, what kind of meat is this? And I used to do that really because, I mean, for the most part, you're not likely to get anything on the list of forbidden meat when you're going through a village in Burma. But there is a rule. And almost no monks follow this rule, including the strict ones. But there is a rule that if a monk accepts meat into his bowl, he has to ask about that meat to make sure that it is allowable. Here in the West, it's more likely. I mean, you could bear meat. Monks aren't allowed to eat bear meat. And who knows, there could be some hunter or a friend of a hunter who actually offers bear meat to a monk. But it's not likely we'll be getting like hyena meat or tiger meat or anything like that. I mean, some rich Chinese people might spend, tens of thousands of dollars to eat tiger meat. Wouldn't surprise me at all. But I mean, if you're a vegetarian, you shouldn't refuse the meat, but you don't have to eat it. So there is a rule that says a monk is supposed to eat systematically, start at one side of his bowl and just work his way to the other side. But still, you can rotate the bowl. So if something you really don't like is on the side you're not going to get to, or you can even like move stuff over to the other side before you start eating. So there's some food that you just can't stand it. If it's just awful food, you're not absolutely required to eat it. You might eat it anyway, just as a kind of spiritual practice and equanimity or something. Like bamboo shoots for me, I just acquired this hatred of bamboo shoots when I was in Burma, because I was living in this place during the rainy season where everyone and their sister was offering bamboo shoots, and it was just awful. I got really skinny that rainy season. So, no, a monk is not obliged to eat everything people put in the bowl. Although a monk should not refuse anything unless it's really just not allowable. So, let's see. Trzaska's is a second question. Which Buddhist tradition King Ashoka was spreading throughout his empire? Well, the Theravadins would say, of course, that he was spreading Theravada. But apparently, it was like he was not really sectarian. The different schools of Buddhism in Ashoka's time were pretty similar still. There was minor differences, but they were still fairly similar. It was all pre-Mahayana, Shravakayana, so-called Hinayana Buddhism back then. And I have read a theory anyway, maybe there's some real evidence backing this up, that when he would be sending out missionaries in the different directions, it would just be whatever school of Buddhism was closest to the frontier, he'd just send missionaries from them. So, yeah, I think that he didn't really single out one tradition at that time. He may have patronized what the Theravada Buddhists call the Third Council, which was during his reign, in which case it may be that he really did favor Theravada. But there is apparently some kind of evidence that I don't recall clearly that not all of the missionaries going out to, proselytize? Like he sent his own son, apparently, Mahinda, as like senior monk to the mission in Sri Lanka. So, I mean, that could just be tradition. I mean, maybe the Theravada Buddhists are just kind of making up the idea that Ashoka's own son was a Theravada Buddhist monk. But, the Northwest wasn't really Theravada territory. So maybe the missionaries he sent into, the Hellenistic states, like Ptolemaic Egypt and so on, the Seleucid Empire and so forth. He did send Buddhist missionaries, but there's a good chance that they weren't Theravada. They were just members of some school that was closest to the frontier there, and it was just more convenient to send them because they were closer. So, I mean, Ashoka was very much in favor of like spiritual toleration. He did not want any religious school to say we're the only correct school, everyone else is wrong, and then just have them like holy wars and this kind of shit. He did not want that at all. And India, in like fairness to ancient India, I mean, they'd have some acrimony, they'd have some spirited debates, heated debates and so forth, but still they tended to take seriously this non-hatred, non-violence, non-hostility stuff. And, they got along, they would have civil debates, polite debates. And, some of the Buddhist universities like Nalanda, there'd be many different schools of Buddhism there. They'd be doing their patimokkha, like their uposatha ceremonies separately because schism had already occurred by then. But still, they're all attending the same classes and so forth. They're all fairly well getting along up until they were genocided by Muslim Turks. So you could say that Ashoka favored Theravada, but was not exclusively favoring Theravada, especially if you take seriously the idea that his son was ordained as a Theravada bhikkhu. Or you could just say that he wasn't really like picking favorites, and it was just whatever schools were, in that area were the ones he endorsed in that area. And if he sent missionaries beyond the frontiers, they'd be mainly monks that were closer to the frontiers. But I really can't say for absolute certain, because I don't think that Theravada tradition is completely unbiased. Clearly, Theravada Buddhist tradition is biased in favor of Theravada Buddhism. So they want to believe that the Buddha spoke Pali and the Buddha himself was the first Theravada Buddhist. But that is somewhat of an exaggeration. Not a completely made up fabrication, but it is kind of a bias, some biased wishful thinking and exaggeration taking place. So I guess I'm just going to move on to Trzaska's third question, which is, are bhikkhuni robes in Vinaya different than those for bhikkhus, or are they exactly the same? And I already explained to him in the Discord server, but this is for the benefit of all you out there who really are keen to know about the robes of ancient Buddhist nuns, that ancient Buddhist nuns had 2 extra robes. Like the monk has 3 robes. They're all just rectangles of cloth. One is the lower robe, or the Udara Sangha, the Andhra Wasaka. It's been a while. The Andhra Wasaka, which he wears as like a sarong. It's wrapped around his waist, held on with a belt. Then there's the Udara Sangha, which is the main upper robe. And then there's a thick double robe called the Sangati. So the nuns have those same 3, but then they've got 2 extra ones. One is the chest binding cloth that they would wear as a brassiere. I assume the more flat-chested ones could just have like one just wrapped around them somehow. And then maybe the more buxom ones would kind of have it like in a sling, kind of going crossways and like tying the back of the neck or something. And then they would also have another extra robe that was an extra lower robe to wear when they were menstruating. So they would have 5. The same 3 as the monks have, plus the chest binding cloth and the menstruation robe. So, and then probably the bhikkhunis nowadays, the so-called bhikkhunis nowadays don't care anything about that, because they really did not insist upon becoming bhikkhunis because they want to follow the rules of bhikkhunis that are mandatory. Instead, they want official status as bhikkhunis for the sake of, the political ideal of equality for women and so forth. And then they just don't follow the rules. That has been my limited experience with the new bhikkhunis at any rate. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from SG. And SG says, it seems to me that someone in lay life might make better progress than a monastic. For instance, if I am quick to anger and decide to become a monastic, all I am really doing is removing the conditions where that arises, but that propensity is still there dormant and might emerge if conditions change. In contrast, in lay life, I can actually engage with the emotion and practice mindfulness and insight practices that can root out the problem at its source for good. What do you think about this idea? Well, I've had kind of similar ideas. For example, modern monks who are living in comfortable monasteries, they know where they're going to sleep that night, they know where their next meal is coming from. Then, in a way, they're just sort of isolated from temptation, isolated from like challenges to their equanimity. And a lot of them just don't make much progress because there's not much opportunity for them to make much progress. Like Ram Dass used to tell this story of this holy man who lived like in a cave or a forest somewhere, and he's meditating alone in silence until the light's just shining out of his eyes. And he figures, okay, I'm ready to rejoin society. And he goes back into town, and almost right away, someone jostles against him on the sidewalk, and irritation arises. Hey, don't you realize I'm a holy man? Why are you bumping me like this? And so it was all of his cultivated holiness was just, it was in isolation of any challenges. But once the challenges came back, it was just, it collapsed. But the Buddha set up the Sangha for a reason. That if you're practicing Dhamma the way monks were supposed to practice Dhamma, like you read in like the Sutta Nipata and so forth, homeless wanderers just throwing themselves on the mercy of the universe, so to speak, then you're going to have plenty of challenges. And the thing is, being a monk simplifies that. I've said before that being a layperson is like a higher difficulty setting than being a monk. But the thing is, most people, if you're living a lay life, you're just so bombarded with distractions and challenges and so forth that you don't have much of a chance. So it's in a way, it's more scientific, where you're isolating yourself and kind of limiting the challenges into a more simplified influx, so to speak, so that you're much more likely to be able to deal with those challenges rather than just get washed away by the flood. So the Buddha set up the Sangha for an enlightened reason. That, if you really are intent on becoming enlightened, just the very fact that, you're dedicating your life to working for a living and scrolling on X, attending to your family, paying the bills, all this kind of stuff, then you have less time to dedicate to just like higher practice, like deep meditation and so forth. Ascetic practice. If you're living with a woman, she's not going to want to just sleep on a mat on the floor. So definitely to be a monastic, especially if you're practicing the way monks are supposed to practice in the texts, then yeah, you're much better off than living the lay life, where you get more challenges, but as a general rule, you're just so completely inundated with challenges that you just get swamped with them. You're overwhelmed. You're just washed away. You're lost in samsara because of it. So nevertheless, not everybody is the same. For some people, just monasticism, just silence and simplicity and discomfort is just not optimal for their personality makeup or whatever to make the most spiritual progress. They might have to learn how to deal with other humans, for example, or just whatever it is, they got some kind of karmic issue that still needs to be worked out, that they can't work out living alone in a cave. They got to be in the midst of other people, for example. So some people may make better spiritual progress as lay people, and some people may even become enlightened more easily as lay people. But still, just going with statistic, your odds are better if you are a monk who is practicing, conscientiously and more or less correctly. And I ran out of coffee. So, yeah, if you're quick to anger and decide to become a monastic, you're still going to get angry, because anger is like pride. I said that the pride comes first, the rationalizations for it come later. So if you're quick to anger and you're living alone in a cave, you're still going to get angry. It's just you're going to get angry at the rat that's gnawing on something outside the cave and keeping you from sleeping at night. You're going to get annoyed at the ants. You're going to get annoyed at the mosquitoes. You're going to get annoyed at the village loudspeaker. You're going to get annoyed at the village woodcutters that are chopping down your forest. You're still going to get angry. But the thing is, it's going to be simpler. It's going to be more isolated so that you can focus on that one thing instead of just being inundated with all these stimuli from all different directions. But as I say, some people, not everyone is the same. And like I've said before, it's like a simple math problem. If there's, let's say your chances of becoming enlightened are 1,000 times greater if you're a monk than if you're a layperson. But if there's 10,000 times more lay people than monks, then still there's going to be 10 times more enlightened lay people than there are enlightened monks. It is true that being a layperson is a higher difficulty setting. But I mean, if you can't really even like master the easy difficulty setting, then you're just kind of kidding yourself if you think you're going to master the higher difficulty setting when you couldn't even like sit alone in a cave, for a week straight with nothing to do, just stare at the wall and meditate. Because you should be able to do that too. And I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from PSA. And PSA says, I have a question about the Canadian government mass deleting its own people. I read that 95.6% of people who got MAID, which is like assisted self-deletion, I guess, in 2024 were white. 95.6% of Canadians who went to the permanent sleep centers were white in 2024. What's your opinion on why white people are self-deleting like this? Well, I wouldn't be surprised if 95.6% of the population of Canada is white. In which case, then it would just be kind of random, wouldn't it? I mean, what percentage of Canadians are white? I would guess it's still pretty high. They got fewer Mexicans and black people. You might have like a higher number of like Indians or Chinese or something. So, what's my opinion on why white people are self-deleting? Well, gosh, I mean, leftist culture especially is really not particularly pro-white. Especially, white men are like the enemy. Like the neo-Marxists have replaced the bourgeoisie or the capitalist class with just white men as like the boogeyman. At least that's the way it has been. So, let's see. What's my opinion on why white people are self-deleting? Well, I mean, mainly they're just self-deleting by not reproducing, which is, I mean, that's their choice to make, I suppose. Let's see. But really, I would guess that Canada has probably a very high percentage of like people of European ancestry as their population anyhow. And then just Canada is Canada, it's just another one of those sort of globalist, castrated, feminized societies, and white men are just pretty much despised. So, I mean, a lot of weaker, feminized kind of beta males who just really can't stand up to society just being biased against them and just essentially insinuating that the world would be a better place if they all self-deleted anyway. Then, they just go with that, I guess. But, I mean, people that aren't like beta male types, I mean, that can just like enrage them and have them just do the opposite. They're just going to stand up for themselves. Let's see. Yeah, I really don't have a whole heck of a lot to say about that. I really don't know very much about Canadian assisted self-deletion. So I'm just going to move on to PSA's next question anyway. He says, is suffering the only thing that is real? We're anatta, we're without self. We're something like consciousness trapped in this contractual cause and effect experience called samsara. So is suffering the only real thing here? Well, my opinion is no. And also the official doctrine of Theravada Buddhism is no for different reasons. In the official doctrine of Theravada Buddhism, like Abhidhamma and the Abhidhamma commentaries, there's like 128 ultimate realities, with dukkha just being one. But then there are some saying, everything is sabbe sankhara dukkha. So everything in samsara is dukkha of some kind, or at least conducive to dukkha, but I don't consider that to be ultimately real. So I don't think that dukkha is ultimately real. I think you could say consciousness is ultimately real, but mental states, which would include unhappy mental states, those are like symbols and just illusory. It's Maya. So my own personal interpretation of the situation is no, suffering is not the only thing that is real. And from the official Orthodox Theravada point of view, then suffering also is not the only thing that is real, but according to Theravadas, because there's all these other things that are real too, like earth element and fire element and perception and volition and masculinity and just all these different realities. Nibbana would be one, and consciousness would be one, and all these different mental states and all these different forms of matter that all be ultimately real. And I just can't accept that. I mean, I think Nibbana, so long as you're not naming it, symbolizing it, then that would be ultimately real. But dukkha is not Nibbana, and it's almost like the opposite of Nibbana, isn't it? Because Nibbana sometimes is defined as the cessation of dukkha. So dukkha would just be sort of like, it's like the essence of unreality, you could say. You know, it's sort of like the atmosphere of the matrix, but it's not ultimately real. And I'm going to move on to the next question. And this person, the proto-pseudo-monk, shame on him, because he asked 4 questions here. And he asked kind of long questions too. So I better just get to the first one, which is not yet transgressive. He says, the 4 stages of enlightenment seem to make sense to me. Why do you doubt them? I think one of your reasons was their non-appearance in other religions, but I wouldn't expect other religions to speak of this, as it only makes sense in a samsara nibbana context. 4 stages of enlightenment. Yeah, I really doubt that they originally meant what they have come to mean now. Like a Sotapanna probably was just like a new convert to Buddhism, in all likelihood. And there is evidence to support that. For example, there's this obscure rule, a Patidesaniya rule, in the Patimokkha, saying that a monk should not be overly dependent upon a family of Sotapannas. And, I mean, the reason is that they're just too rich in faith, and they might try to donate beyond their means through excess of devotion, that sort of thing. Also, like I mentioned before, like the first several suttas of the Iddhivuttaka, an obscure collection of texts in the Khuddika Nikaya, apparently uses anagami as a synonym for enlightenment. And it does make sense. A non-returner, it may have originally meant a fully enlightened being, but then it's just the systematizers, tried to just kind of redefine it so that it fit more nicely into the system or whatever. Also, it is true, no other system mentions enlightenment, and or mentions the 4 stages of ariya-hood, and I just cannot believe that only Theravada Buddhism has some monopoly on enlightenment. Even Mahayana Buddhists interpret the 4 stages differently. Different schools of Buddhism had different interpretations of these same 4 stages. There's one cardinal Mahayana text, I don't remember exactly which one, Lankavatara Sutra or something like that, that had like one of the 4 stages being like a Pacceka Buddha. And it was just this bizarre, I think they actually equated the anagami with a Buddha or something. And also, like some texts, like the Samanya-Pala Sutta, which is a relatively old text, and it's one of the first texts in the Digha Nikaya. I think it's like the second sutta in the Digha Nikaya, the second sutta of the entire Sutta Pitaka, where the Buddha is explaining to King Ajatasattu this in sequential order of advancement. What are the benefits of renouncing the world and becoming a bhikkhu? And he doesn't mention anything about these 4 stages. You'd think that it'd be up near the top of the attainments that you can have, but he goes from like jhana and psychic powers just straight to enlightenment. So, yeah, there's a number of reasons. I mean, St. John of the Cross may have been a fully enlightened being, and some of his experiences are, I mean, he was definitely a master of meditation, a master of jhana. And he did have like a three-part system very similar to the three-part system in Theravada Buddhism of the Putujana or common worldling, the Sekha or the person still in training, which is a person who has attainment and mastery, but they're not fully enlightened yet. And then you've got the Asekha, one no longer in training, who is perfected. And then St. John of the Cross, apparently completely independently of Theravada Buddhism, had the same, he had the beginner, which is 99.9% of the entire population. Then he had the adept, which is a person who has mastered high contemplation or the higher jhanas from a Buddhist point of view, but is not yet perfected. And then he's got, to my surprise, he had the stage of the perfected. The person who has mortified their own self-will and has become just a puppet of God. You know, they're just acting entirely under the will of God, which comes very close to the teachings in Theravada Buddhism. Just independently of each other, just through empirical, practical, pragmatic means, they just, St. John of the Cross and the early Indian Buddhists apparently just came upon these ideas separately, just because that's the way it is. And so, like St. John of the Cross says, you mortify your own self-will, you're no longer acting upon will. In Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, the fully enlightened being no longer is creating karma, which is will. So they've got it. I mean, of course, the Theravada Buddhists don't say that you're a puppet of God, you're acting under the will of God, you're always just automatically doing the right thing, apparently. So you can have masters, like extremely wise people, different parts of the world, coming up with similar ideas. They might have different cultural baggage that modifies that, you know, like the belief in God for the Christians and the lack of same in Buddhists, but still it's very similar. And this 4 stages, Sotapanna, Sakadagami, Anagami, Arahant, as just this monopoly of Theravada Buddhism or some of the earlier schools of Buddhism, because even the Mahayana Buddhists had 4 stages, but different definitions for the 4 stages. They came to mean something different. And I just do not believe that Theravada Buddhism has a monopoly on enlightenment. And you'd think that it would at least be mentioned in the Samanyapala Sutta. The higher jhanas above 4th jhana also aren't mentioned. So, yeah, I mean, those are my main reasons, I guess. And I'm still just, I mean, people just kind of stubbornly insist upon asking me what Sotapannas can do and can't do and all this kind of thing. And it's all academic to me because I think that the whole 4 stages are just made up. So I'm just going to move on to the Proto-Sudo monk's next question. He says, I feel a strong calling to the life of a bhikkhu. However, I have only one major concern. If a bhikkhu is supposedly a homeless, wandering, mendicant beggar, only allowed to possess a few items and have the 4 requisites, does this mean a monk cannot read other books? The monk life may satisfy certain spiritual needs, but if I have no access to books or an electronic device with an internet connection, I may have no access to certain literature for satisfying intellectual needs. My second concern about becoming a monk is being limited in doing good for the world, and I also think reading books, the news, etc., can make one potentially of better use to the world, you being an example of this. Well, there's no question there. Oh, wait, here it is. Does this mean a monk cannot read other books? Well, I mean, before I became a monk, it was like I had certain concerns, like I'm going to have to get rid of my book collection. I had this bookcase full of books, and I was still like avidly reading books at the time. And I valued my book collection. You know, it was always getting better and better because I had this system. If I get a new book, I got to get rid of an old book because they all got to fit on that same bookcase. So there was that. I actually was it was a challenge for me to go without watching pro football, although I have zero desire to watch pro football now. But at the time, That was a challenge. And also, of course, it was like the orgasm sex thing. But I mean, let's see, where does it say? Where does he say intellectual needs have no access to certain literature for satisfying intellectual needs? They're not intellectual needs, they are cravings. And so you're definitely going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to overcome your cravings for intellectual stimulation or for the news. I knew this one monk. He was a very serious monk. He was a retired surgeon. He was Burmese. He had been a surgeon, for years. He was upper crust, kind of an aristocratic type. And then when he retired, he became a monk, and he tried to be a very serious monk, but he had this one addiction. He had to listen to the news on the radio, and still he's like politically oriented. He's still thinking about politics, which is just animal knowledge from the Buddhist point of view. You read the texts, news, politics, that's just like tira chana vijja, or just animal knowledge. Monks shouldn't do that kind of stuff. And it may seem like it's difficult. Like I was talking about my book collection. That was a challenge for me. That it was like a difficult choice to make, to get rid of almost all my books. I kept a few Dhamma books. I still have like a copy of the Dhammapada I had since before I was a monk. But once I got rid of them, it was just like getting rid of them was the difficult part, but being rid of them afterwards was easy. And so for years, all of my possessions I could carry, at once. Everything I owned, I could just pick it up and go somewhere else. For several years as a monk. But then I start collecting books because, of course, I've got intellectual curiosity too. Not exactly intellectual needs, but intellectual desires, I guess. And then before long, I had too many books. It was mainly books that I owned. Like half of, just going with weight, most of what I owned was books. That was back before internet, that sort of thing. Especially in Burma. Especially in a Burmese forest. So, yeah, it's just another attachment. This desire for books. I mean, I eventually succumbed to the desire enough that I started acquiring another book collection while I was a monk. More dharmic, but still a book collection. But still, it's not really a need. It's just craving. It's an attachment. And then, let's see, second concern is about doing good for the world. And like I told you with regard to, or I've told everybody in the Q&As before, Q's and A's, that St. John of the Cross used to say that you got two people. One person is tending the sick and clothing the people that don't have clothes and feeding the hungry and providing homes to the homeless and just serving mankind 24/7 with just naps every now and then. And then there's another person who is engaged in high contemplation, in solitude, in a cell. And St. John of the Cross says this second person is actually helping the world more than the first person is. And like the Diamond Cutter Sutra says something similar, that you could tend the sick, feed the hungry, etc., or you could just memorize and master one verse from the Diamond Cutter Sutra, and actually you're doing better by memorizing and mastering one verse from the Diamond Cutter Sutra than doing all this worldly stuff. Because all this worldly stuff, I mean, you're putting Band-Aids on a cancer patient. You're not really curing the cause, you're just treating symptoms. And if you're practicing high contemplation, you're raising the level of consciousness of the earth. Or you could be like that one person in the Old Testament, that God will not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for the sake of one good man. So there's that too. And I mean, it's just worldliness. It's like, I don't want to wake up from this dream because I want to tend to all the dream people that I'm dreaming. I mean, that's essentially the attitude. The world is not real. Not ultimately real. Anyway, you can say it's virtually real. Seems virtually real. So, doing good for the world. Yeah, you still do better good for the world just becoming a sage. Even if you stay in solitude for the rest of your life. So, I think I'm just going to move on to Proto-Pseudo-Monk's third question. And this is a question on engaged Buddhism. The Sotapanna Bodhisatta, he says, assuming there is such a thing as stream entry, so this is already an academic question apparently, I was wondering if you are guaranteed enlightenment in 7 lifetimes after entering the stream, so there's no risk of samsara, wouldn't there be an ethical obligation to engage in humanitarian works, like feeding the hungry, building schools, etc.? I can't get out of my Protestant conditioning work ethic. It seems like if you are liberated, you just might as well help others. But when you're liberated, you realize those others aren't real. They're inhabitants of a dream that you are dreaming. But I've just interrupted myself. It seems like if you're liberated, you just might as well help others. There's no loss, only gain. I know the arahant has no use for good karma, but still, you just might as well help others. I can't really explain it. It just seems obvious. Apparently, it seems obvious to him that these others are ultimately real, too. If, as you have said, an enlightened being, and this is still Proto-Pseudo-Monks speaking here, if, as you have said, an enlightened being will appear no different to an ordinary being, the ethical value of his realization of nibbana is 0. On the other hand, engaging in humanitarian works would have a positive ethical value on other beings. And in general, how do you respond to the critics that the arahant path is selfish? So this is, Proto-Pseudo-Monk is just asking questions all over the place. The second question divided into 2 questions, and this one is dividing into 2 questions, and you still got a transgressive 4th question, which is actually a 6th question. So, I think there's one fairly obvious statement. I mean, at least with regard to enlightened and unenlightened beings. You got people are trapped in a burning building. This is just like a standard Buddhist symbol, like a metaphor. We're all in a burning building. So, obviously, it makes more sense to find a way out of the burning building than to stay in the burning building and treat the burn victims. I mean, treating the burn victims, that's very humanitarian and all. But of course, the building is on fire, and there's just going to be more and more burn victims. And really, the way to help others is to find a way out and then help others to get out of the building. Not just like treating burn victims, going back into the building after you found a way out and just staying in the building treating burn victims. That doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense. I mean, even assuming that these beings are real, after you found a way out, then you come back in if you choose, if it seems appropriate to you in your infinite wisdom to go back into the building and then like help others get out of the building. But of course, most of them don't even want to leave. They'll just tell you to fuck off. It's like, yeah, this supposed outside the building. Yeah, we're going to go out there where it could be even worse. Most people don't even want to leave the building, even though it's on fire. So then you have like the Lotus Sutra, I think. I read it a long, long time ago, where the Buddha uses like these tricks to like trick people into leaving the building. You know, he makes these carts pulled by different animals to attract people out of the burning building because they're just too fucking stupid to leave the burning building of their own volition without being tricked into leaving it. And that's sort of like the skillful means of the different schools of Buddhism. Okay, so, yeah, I mean, it's like you wake up from the dream and then you go back to sleep and lucid dream in order to be nice to the dream beings. That's essentially what it amounts to. Because this is not ultimate reality. We are in the matrix. It's not a computer-generated matrix. It's just a mind-generated matrix, but it's still a matrix. So, I mean, first of all, just get yourself liberated, get enlightened, and then in your wisdom, you will be better able to decide whether you should spend the rest of your life feeding hungry people, for example. But numero uno is find your own way out of the burning building. And then you can make your decisions. But don't make your decisions before you become enlightened because they're going to be unenlightened decisions. They're going to be unwise, delusional decisions about what you're going to do after you become enlightened. Maybe you become enlightened and you realize, wow, that was a stupid idea. So let's this is like, see, question 3b. How do I respond to the critics that the Arahant path is selfish? Well, I mean, it's kind of ironic that the Arahant path is like dedicated to no self. So, like, the system that teaches no self and the realization of no self is somehow selfish. I mean, it may look selfish to other people because they might want something out of you. And Paul Lowe did say that if you really want to become enlightened to some degree, you do have to be selfish to some degree. Like, if I just tried to please my parents, I would have got married and had kids for my mother to spoil. My mother, I mean, she wanted grandkids to spoil, and I just wouldn't give her any. So that was kind of selfish, wasn't it? I just cared about my own spiritual welfare more than I cared about my mother's desire for grandkids to spoil. Well, I mean, you can call that selfish, fine. I mean, people say the Buddha himself was selfish. He'd abandoned his wife and child. Of course, they were living in a palace and, you know, they weren't hurting for food or anything. But still, it was just selfish. People say that, like Hindus especially, I think. The Buddha was selfish. But, I mean, to some degree, I mean, you find your own way out of the burning building is selfish because you're not treating the fucking burn victims and burning to death yourself in the process. So, I mean, who cares what critics say? I mean, critics can say all kinds of things. Critics can say that the Buddha himself was just like an asshole who abandoned his own family. So, I mean, critics can say whatever the hell they want to say, and critics are going to criticize no matter what. They're going to find fault with anything. But to some degree, like Paul Lowe says, I mean, you have to appear selfish anyway, because you have to get, like, finding a way out of that burning building has to be top priority for yourself. I mean, you got to find your own way out of that burning building. I mean, you're not just going to find some way for somebody else to get out of the building. Because, I mean, you could get out too. So really, you got to find a way for yourself to get out of the building in order for you to find a way for anyone else to get out of the building. And people can call that selfish because you could be treating those burn victims. But, I mean, so what? So, the proto-pseudo-monk has also asked another fourth question, and it's about depression and renunciation, how they appear to be the same thing because you fail to find pleasure in just ordinary things that usually you would find pleasure from. And I'm not going to go into detail. I mean, there's already, Proto-Pseudo-Monk has asked lots of questions this time. But, I mean, my experience of depression is that my mind contracts. It's like I am contracted. That is like the main cause of everything else. It's like expansion and contraction of the mind somehow. And when I'm like contracted, in a contracted state, then like when I was a monk, trying to meditate while in one of these contracted mental states, it was like trying to balance a marble on the tip of a sharpened pencil. It was virtually impossible. And just had no interest in Dhamma even, you know, just no interest in much of anything, just want to sleep more, that kind of thing. So, I mean, renunciation and depression are not the same thing. I mean, you can still be a joyful renunciant, but you can't really be joyfully depressed as far as I know. But this is like a very transgressive extra question, and that's about as far as I'm going to get with it. And I'm going to move on to the next question because we've already like getting up towards 2.5 hours anyway. There's quite a few questions, like at least 40 questions this time. So the next question is from Edelweiss Voyager. And Edelweiss Voyager says, is the incorrigible quality of an icchantika comparable to the spiritual state of animals, given that, as you mentioned previously, it is extremely difficult for animals to accumulate sufficient merit and achieve rebirth in human form? Do you agree with the Mahayana teaching that despite their unfortunate nature, these beings still contain enlightenment? So, icchantika, it's a Mahayana term, and it's based, I mean, the Pali equivalent of like the verb would be ichchadi, which means to desire, to want. So I assume that an icchantika, even though it's a Mahayana term, means like a desirer. It's just a person who's just wallowing in samsara. They're clueless with regard to anything other than samsara, which is really most people, it seems to me. I mean, even religious people who go to church, I mean, still they're just like stuck in samsara and clueless to the fact that they are stuck in samsara. So, let's see, is this incorrigible quality of a icchantika or desirer, a person just wholeheartedly wallowing in samsara, comparable to the spiritual state of animals? Yeah, it is, I think. It's just that even one of these desirers, if they hit that crisis, let's say that all of a sudden they get some terminal illness or, just they lose everything. They hit rock bottom and still, I mean, it can just like slam them, or they have a near-death experience or something. It can just slam them into a higher state of consciousness just against their will, like kicking and screaming. Like something like what happened to Eckhart Tolle, where he was just like in a state of just self-deletional depression, and he just couldn't stand it, and it just jolted him into a higher level of consciousness. Whether he was an icchantika beforehand or not, I can't say. But still, there's always the potential. I mean, you'd have to be really super messed up, like Jeffrey Dahmer or somebody like that, or let's say Caligula, if the histories about him are true, or Elagabalus, or you can just name any number of like Hollywood celebrities or like musical celebrities, that kind of thing, who are just wholeheartedly just wallowing in samsara. Any number of Instagram thoughts, that kind of thing, that still, even though they're clueless with regard to anything higher than the matrix, they're definitely blue-pilled, still, I mean, they still at least have the potential, presumably, if they have the karma for it, to eventually get red-pilled. Or at least they can be wallowing wholeheartedly in samsara, but still be like benevolent. Just because you're wallowing wholeheartedly in samsara doesn't mean that you're evil. So, I mean, still they can be, helping their neighbor. They can, feeling love in their heart. They have a soft spot for puppies, especially if they got like a round belly and the hiccups. They're just, they're still, I mean, they're not evil people. So still you can be earning merit. So they'd probably be in a better position than animals, even if they're just wholeheartedly wallowing in samsara without being evil. But animals also, I really do not accept the Buddhist idea that animals just can't earn merit, or that it's very difficult for animals to earn merit. Because, I mean, even for a mother animal to love her babies, I mean, you could say that's just animal instinct and so forth. It's just automatic behavior. But you could say the same thing with regard to most human women. It's maternal instinct. So, I mean, it's still love. I mean, animals can still be nice to each other, especially social animals. So, yeah, it's comparable to the spiritual state of animals, although being a human and having like higher level of consciousness, or at least a more expansive consciousness, a kind of consciousness that has the potential to be more complicated and absorb more things and so forth, that still there's going to be greater potential for some experience to turn them around and wake them up. Like Angulimala in the texts. I mean, he was a serial killer. I mean, regardless of anything else, he probably had some, wholesome meritorious karma and all this, but still he was literally a serial killer. And still the Buddha was able to convert him to Buddhism, and he just turned right around, became a saintly renunciant monk, and eventually became enlightened. So maybe the icchantika would rule out people that really have this karmic potential for, turning themselves around. Because I really am not an expert on the term, because it really is a Mahayana Buddhist term, and I've I can't recall even coming across this term before. I had to look it up to see what it meant. Although icchantika is a Pali term that means to desire or to want. So it's understandable. I'm pretty sure it means desirer. And I would assume it means just someone wholeheartedly wallowing in samsara, wallowing in delusion, just clueless that there's anything higher than this. Unless maybe it's just some anthropomorphic god sitting on a throne in heaven, just within the same system of samsara, just higher up. So, the question, do you agree with the Mahayana teaching that despite their unfortunate nature, these beings can still attain enlightenment? Well, if Mahayana teachings say that still these people wholeheartedly wallowing in samsara can still attain enlightenment, then it wouldn't rule out the people that have the potential for that. So, yeah, why not? I mean, it probably will take some kind of just severe crisis, just bashing them in the head, like a near-death experience or something. But still, I mean, that's probably what it would take in more extreme cases. And even in probably most cases, the near-death experience just wouldn't be enough, or whatever the crisis is. But that's kind of a tough question, because I'm really not an authority on what Mahayana Buddhism says about icchantika people. So I'm just going to move on to this question. This is from Rui. And Rui says, to go with the season and the decorations in your home, would you prefer a few words on the temptations of the Buddha and those of Jesus? Well, all we know is what tradition says. And even tradition doesn't say a whole lot about the temptations of the Buddha, except when he's sitting under the Bodhi tree and Mara's daughters are just being as voluptuous as they can manage, trying to tempt the Buddha. So it wasn't, Mara was sending armies and so forth to try to distract the Buddha out of his meditation. But Mara himself wasn't coming up to the Buddha and say, why don't you just become like a wheel-turning monarch and become king of the world, that kind of thing, like Satan was apparently or allegedly doing to Jesus of Nazareth. So the temptations of the Buddha, apparently they were mainly sexual temptations, plus just attempts of Mara to just kind of distract him from being in a deep meditative state. So, yeah, but probably, in reality, the Buddha was experiencing other temptations, just remembering his wife and child, that kind of thing. That could be a temptation. Or after striving and striving and striving and, just practically killing himself and still not succeeding, there might have been the occasional thought of maybe I should just go back and be king of Kapilavatthu or something. But yeah, mainly the temptations that you read about in the tradition are just sexual temptations of Mara's daughters being as voluptuous as they can manage and still failing to get the Buddha to just lose his concentration by directing his concentration onto them. With regard to Jesus, he's out in the wilderness, out in the desert, I assume, and Satan comes to him and it's like, cast yourself off the top of the mountain, or turn these rocks into bread and feed the people, or become king of the world. And, that was more of the kind of temptations that, besides the sexual ones that a person might experience, at least, become king of the world. That would be a temptation for a lot of people. Just becoming a Roman emperor was a huge temptation for a lot of Roman men, obviously, even though they knew in all likelihood they weren't going to survive more than about 2 years after becoming emperor, especially during the 3rd century. Turnover rate for emperors was really high in the 3rd century. But there was no shortage of men wanting to be emperor just because of power and glory and harems of beautiful girls and so forth. So, yeah, I'm just going with tradition because that's really all we can know. That's all we have to see that isn't just lost in the obscurity of time. The Buddha was mainly tempted by sex, and he succeeded in resisting that temptation. Jesus was tempted, as first becoming king of the world by Satan. Satan was going to make him king of the world, or something along those lines. It's been a while since I've read the New Testament. And then there was something about kind of like what the proto-pseudo-monk was saying. It's like, why renounce the world? You can turn these stones into bread and feed the masses, which I can't remember why Jesus turned that one down. And then I think Satan took him up on top of a mountain to look down at the world and says something like, cast yourself off and the mountain and the angels will catch you. And then I think Jesus says, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. But it was different kinds of temptations, I guess. But I assume in reality that their temptations would be fairly similar because they were men, human beings with, human nature and so forth. So probably both of them would have experienced some sexual temptation before their experience. And also they might have some temptations to just rejoin the world and, just make an honest living, that kind of thing, instead of, why am I doing this shit to myself? So let's see. That was a few words. That's Rui only asked for a few words, and so that was more than a few. That was lots of words. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Ethiopian Fake Tig. An Ethiopian Fake Tig says, would you have had a kid if you have lived a normal life, and if so, how many? Or do you have any anti-natalist stance? Well, like I was saying earlier, back in the 80s when I was a young man, it just seemed like the world was obscenely overpopulated. I was moving towards a degree in ecology at the time. If I had not become a monk, I probably would have gone to grad school and majored in like marine ecology or something. And it just seemed like the world was just grotesquely overpopulated. And also, there's always this threat of nuclear Armageddon and all these other things. And it's like, is it really responsible to bring a child into this world when you don't know what the world's going to be like 20 years from now? But in retrospect, if I knew then what I know now, I'd know that there's no real overpopulation crisis, like people were saying, like the alarmists were saying. There's no real, there was still the threat of nuclear war, but it just never happened. This global warming thing is even less of a threat than the nuclear Armageddon thing. That's the global warming thing is largely just an attempt at just getting a foot in the door for world government through international regulatory commissions and so forth, it seems to me. So, it would depend on the woman. Like, I'd get married, and it would depend on my wife's desire for children too. Nowadays, if I look back on it, I think it'd probably be kind of a good thing to have children. But, it's not absolutely necessary, obviously, because I've gotten this far without doing that. But, if I knew then what I know now, there's a good chance I'd settle down, find my sweetheart earlier, and we might have kids together. And, I would have invested in Amazon stock early on, bought some Bitcoin, and have hundreds of millions of dollars, and just get a square mile of forest land and set up a little house in the middle and lots of aquariums or something. Horses, maybe. So, yeah, nowadays you see that the overpopulation crisis, and in the 70s and 80s, they were talking about the world is too overpopulated. There's billions of people are going to be like starving. It'll be worldwide famine and on and on. And now it's like the opposite. It's like, especially the West is just dying out, or Korea, also South Korea. I think they've got one of the lowest reproductive rates of any country. Japan. But it's not going to, they're not just going to go extinct. It's just going to dwindle down till you get to this nucleus of the people who breed like bunnies, and then it's just going to go back up again. So, yeah, there is a good chance if I lived a normal life, I would have had kids, although I didn't want kids when I was younger. But if I knew then what I know now, there's a good chance I would have kids. But I remember when I was a monk, especially a young monk, the one time I was happiest that I was a monk, this, not with regard to like deep bliss and satisfaction, but just sort of a superficial joy that I am a monk, is when every time I'd hear a screaming baby. I'd be walking through the village going for alms, and then you hear some baby crying in one of these bamboo huts, and then you hear this exasperated female voice, saying, "Ba they don't." It's like, what is it now? This kind of thing. Then I would just be thrilled that I was a monk, because the sound of screaming babies, I've never liked the sound of screaming babies. I remember when I was like in my 20s, I had these two friends. They were like party animals. And then they kind of settled down and had kids. And I mean, I became friends with them back when we were all party animals together. And then they have kids. And it's like one was like 3 and the other one was like 4 or something. 2 and 4, something like that. And they would cry about every 30 minutes, but it wasn't completely in sync. So sometimes one of them would be crying like at 15-minute intervals from the other one. And then every once in a while they'd get into sync and they'd both be crying at the same time. And I'd just be like sitting on the couch, just like my eyes bulging out, just kind of like my head, my hands, just, and Carol, the mother of the children, would look at me and just kind of laugh and say, "Poor David." Because I mean, they were numb to it. They were used to it. It was every day for them. So I guess if you become a parent, first of all, you're kind of doped up on parenthood hormones that kind of gives you resistance or something. But yeah, there's a good chance. It would depend on various circumstances. And I'd have to know then at least a little bit of what I know now. But yeah, I might have kids. I might have 4 kids. But who knows? It's all academic, because it's just kind of dealing with a sort of alternate fantasy world. So I'm just going to move on to Ethiopian Fake Tig's next question, which is, if you time traveled back to the Buddhist time, do you think it would be just like how the myth said, or do you think he would just be an ordinary person that knows Dhamma well? Well, that's a false dichotomy. I don't think I'd pick either one. I don't think it would be just how the myth said, because then the Buddha would be like 27 feet tall and all this kind of stuff. He would have the 32 marks of the Mahapurisa, which would be impossible to all be on the same person at the same time. So that'd be just like literally impossible. But I don't think he was just like some ordinary guy. Like I knew this one person who had been a monk for about 13 years and then dropped out and then became sort of like an anti-Buddhist. And he told me once, or maybe more than once, that in his opinion, the Buddha was just sort of like an ancient Joseph Goldstein. Just like an ancient Dhamma teacher. But I don't think either one of those is likely. I think he was a sage. If enlightenment is possible in this world, then he'd be a prime example of a candidate for that. But within a samsaric context, there's sort of a paradox of, how are you fully enlightened within the context of samsara and so forth. But yeah, he was a sage. I don't think he was just like an ancient Jack Cornfield. So yeah, a long time ago, I sort of came up with this theme for like a science fiction short story of a time machine going back to the Buddhist time. And you'd have like this woman who gets to go in the time machine because she's famous for writing books like How to Awaken the Buddha Within, this kind of stuff, like a self-help guru. Then you'd have like the Burmese Sayadaw, traditionalist Burmese Sayadaw. He'd get to go visit the Buddha. And then you'd have like a Richard Gombrich type, like some academic Buddhistic scholar. And then you'd have like just the technician running the time machine. He's, the lab assistant who's been trained on how to work the time machine. He'd have to go too. So the woman who wrote the book, How to Awaken the Buddha Within, she all of a sudden gets sick right before and she can't go. There's going to be like an implication that she's just having like a panic attack. She can't dare to face the Buddha, this kind of thing. So you have the smug academic scholar, the staunchly faith-oriented Sayadaw, and the humble technician go back in time. And they see this, they go to, I mean, they're asking where to find the Buddha. The Sayadaw is amazed that nobody can understand his Pali. So the smug academic scholar, he knows more how to pronounce the language more correctly. It's not pure Pali, he's speaking like Magadhi, this kind of thing. So he's having to act as an interpreter. So he wants to meet the Buddha. They say he's over there. So they go and they see this scroungy looking guy. He's got stubble. He looks like a normal person. Got stubble. Maybe he's got like a fly crawling on the side of his head. He's wearing rags. Maybe doesn't smell very good. And the Sayadaw is indignant. He said, that can't be the Buddha. He's not 27 feet tall. And he just stomps off in a huff, refuses to even talk to him. But I mean, it really is the Buddha. It's Gautama Buddha. He's just an ascetic. He's a man who hasn't bathed in 2 weeks, got a fly crawling on his head. And so the academic scholar goes and has this smug conversation, mainly just sort of asking questions and kind of bragging about his own theories and so forth. And the Buddha really doesn't get very far with him because the academic scholars, his mind is all full of these ideas of academic theories and so forth. And then he politely excuses himself because he also wants to go talk with Makali Gosala, and they're on a limited schedule. And so off he goes with this smug smile on his face. And so finally, they're ready to go back into the future again. And where's the technician? Where's this humble, ordinary technician guy? They're looking around. They find that he is like on his knees in front of the Buddha. He's just like begging for, he wants to go forth from the home into homelessness, this kind of thing. So the technician just stays and becomes a monk, whereas the faith-oriented Sayadaw won't even go close to the Buddha because he thinks it's not the real Buddha because it looks like an ordinary scroungy, like ascetic. And then the smug scholar, he's just full of his own ideas and he doesn't care. But how does that have anything to do? Oh, if I time travel to the Buddha's time? Yeah, he'd be an enlightened sage, but he wouldn't be 27 feet tall or anything like that. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. After I hijacked that question by just talking about my own idea for a science fiction short story. So Ethiopian Fake Tig's next question. I spent a lot of time alone and I'm very anti the idea that mastering jhana is going to give me superpowers. Spending time alone weakens one's ego and identity, and I don't want to believe anything my mind tells me. How did you manage to stay sane in Burma when you were alone and meditating a lot? Because it can feel very weird and a lot of stuff can happen to the mind where you begin to have weird thoughts. Well, I mean, the purpose of being a monk is to go sane. Practicing Dhamma makes you more sane. You're observing your mind, you're observing like the foibles of it and so forth. It is true that if you live alone for a long time, you can start drifting away from normality. I mean, you might be a really good meditator, but you're going to be eccentric too. So that happens. I acquired the habit of just talking to myself. So when I'm at work, sometimes I'll just be talking to myself. There's a lot of people that look like they're talking to themselves, but they got like earbuds and they're talking on the phone. I don't have the earbuds. It's just a habit. It's like a human instinct, even in like babies that can't speak English yet or speak any language yet, that you just want to speak. And if you don't have people to talk to, you'll talk to dogs, you'll talk to lizards, you talk to yourself. It just happens. It's just kind of a stereotype of the hermit, the misanthropic hermit living out in the desert in Arizona or something, who's just like muttering to himself all the time. So, I mean, there is that. If you're not careful and you don't have any feedback from others, like a teacher, like a wise friend, then you can start drifting in weird directions just through isolation and no feedback, kind of helping you to keep you on the straight and narrow, so to speak, of like normal humanity. But at the same time, if you're doing deep meditation, I mean, you're going sane more than you're going weird. So, I mean, I'm just a loner by nature. I'm self-sufficient for the most part. I've never really needed human companionship, and I really do not really love the human race as much as the average person does. So, I mean, it was just in harmony with my nature. And it's one of the best reasons for becoming a monk. Desire for enlightenment, ironically, is not the best reason for becoming a monk. One of the best reasons, I mean, a better reason than just desire for enlightenment is just the consideration that it's like your sacred duty to strive for enlightenment if you're able to. I mean, that I think would be a better reason than this desire for something that you cannot possibly understand until you get there anyway. But another possible better reason for becoming a monk is, or a good reason for becoming a monk, is just living a life of solitude and quietness and simplicity is just in harmony with your nature. You're introspective. You're not a socially oriented person. You don't require comfort. You know, you're kind of austere by nature. Then just going alone, just camping in the wilderness for the rest of your life. I mean, that is a fairly good reason for being a monk. If it's just the lifestyle is in harmony with your character, which was pretty much the case in my case, although I remained stubbornly heterosexual in my human nature. And I just got as far as I could with it. And so after several years of stagnation as a monk, I decided to try something else. So, I mean, jhana could give you superpowers anyway. But see, spending time alone weakens one's ego and identity. Yeah, that's one of the points of it. You're not getting it reinforced. And the ego is illusion. It's like the root of all delusion and suffering is the conceit, I am. So you don't want to believe anything your mind tells you, then you practice intensive mindfulness meditation and just observe mental states arising and passing away, which you can do better if you're living alone in a cave. So there's certain give and take, but the positives seem to outweigh the negatives unless you just are a social being, you require comfort, and you just need human feedback in order to keep you from going nuts. In which case, you're better off not becoming a solitary, renunciant, recluse monk. And I'm just going to move on to the next question because, we're getting kind of close to the bottom. We don't have very many questions to go. So it might be a little over 3 hours, but we're not going to set any records this time. But just to make sure that it goes at least 3 hours, I will mention that 2 days ago at work, I became a cartoon character temporarily. And that I was walking across the dock carrying a piece of plywood, and all of a sudden my feet just shoot out from under me. I land on my backside with this loud bang from the plywood hitting the floor next to me. And I'm thinking, what could have been that slippery? What could I have stepped in? And I'm thinking, must be a puddle of oil or transmission fluid or something. And I look down, and there's a banana peel. I had stepped on a banana peel, just like in the cartoons. And there was only one other person saw it at work. He was this really silent guy. He doesn't talk hardly at all. If he has to say something, he does. But for the most part, he's just like silent poker face at work. And he was literally laughing. It's the only time I ever saw that guy laugh is after I slipped on a banana peel. So it works. The sight gag works in real life. But getting back to Raphael here and his question, Raphael says, are you informed about the current conflict between Cambodia and Thailand? Is it fair to say that it is absolutely insane that Buddhist soldiers fight each other and die over an ancient Hindu temple? Well, they're probably not fighting each other and dying literally over an ancient Hindu temple. I mean, I really don't know the details about the conflict between Cambodia and Thailand other than Donald Trump has bragged about ending that war. But I mean, generally, Buddhist countries have fought against each other. Burma and Thailand, Burma and Siam, as it used to be called. I mean, they were like arch enemies. They were sort of like England and France or Sparta and Athens. They were just arch enemies. But I mean, mainly they were fighting over territory. That's a political thing. The Hindu temple thing, maybe, I mean, they don't really care that it's a Hindu temple so much as, it could be valuable property, valuable addition to their territory if they haven't acquired it yet, that kind of thing. So, most wars are fought over like territory. Even the Trojan War, it's supposed to be Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships and all that. But Helen of Troy she'd been abducted or eloped with, what was his name? Paris? It was like 10 years or something before the Greeks decided, well, we better go and avenge this outrage. I mean, probably Troy was right there on the shipping lanes, from the Black Sea into the Aegean Sea. And so it was territory or just control of shipping lanes in this case. Or, that was the beginning of the Bronze Age collapse. So it was just the fashion to be sacking other cities and acquiring their loot, their booty. And I think the Christmas tree just went out. It's on an automatic timer. So, am I informed about the current conflict between Cambodia and Thailand? Not very. Is it fair to say that it's absolutely insane for the Buddhist soldiers fight each other and die over an ancient Hindu temple? Well, you have to be insane to be like in samsara anyway. Old Pali saying, Putujino umadako, which means the common person is insane. But it's just the standard like politics. I really don't think they care that if it's a Hindu temple or not. It's just valuable territory. That would be my guess. And it's whether you're Buddhist or, Christians, you read the Christian Bible and it's like, turn the other cheek, it's like, you're not supposed to be violent. And then there's Christians have been like fighting wars forever, ever since there's been Christianity or ever since they got into power. There's been Christian holy wars and just Christians fighting each other over territory. So, yeah, it's insane. I'm going to move on to Raphael's next question. Your opinion on those tweets, apparently a Korean... Oh, okay. He says, your opinion on those tweets. And then he just sent like a screenshot of two tweets made by someone with a Korean name. Maybe they aren't really Korean, I don't know. Or maybe they're just into Korean Buddhism or something. But this person, apparently a Korean Buddhist, was referring to a Jataka story in which the Bodhisatta kills a murderer on a boat who presumably was going to kill the other people on the boat. And then this person claims that the Bodhisatta actually did good karma and that killing compassionately is good. And I think this is a Mahayana Jataka story. And the Mahayanists were kind of going like a more tantric route than the Buddhists or the Theravada Buddhists. I don't think I could be wrong, but I don't think it's in the Theravada Buddhist, like the Pali Jatakas, because the Buddha just would not do this. The Bodhisatta maybe, but then he'd like go to hell for it. So the idea is if you kill a murderer, that's actually good and not bad. But according to Buddhist ethics, it just doesn't work that way at all. At least not Theravada Buddhist ethics. You could like tie him up, incapacitate him, something like that. That wouldn't be so bad. Just capture him and shackle him for the authorities to deal with. That would probably be the enlightened thing to do. So, yeah, this is just opening a can of Mahayana Buddhist worms, it seems to me. From the point of view of Buddhist ethics, killing is one of the worst things you can possibly do, and you're better off just not doing it. And if some murderer kills other people, that's on them. Just to stand there and do nothing is morally neutral. So, the Theravada Buddhist answer to the proverbial trolley problem, you got the trolley car on the tracks heading towards 10 people tied to the tracks. And all you got to do is pull a lever and it'll divert the trolley car. Instead of squishing those 10 people, it'll only squish one person on these other tracks. And what's the ethical thing to do? From the Buddhist point of view, you just don't do anything. It's going to squish those 10 people and, well, It's not on you. It's just that the West has this utilitarian ethic that is just alien to Buddhism. And so a lot of even Western Buddhists just cannot wrap their head around Buddhist ethics. They just don't get it. They just do not realize that you're living in a dream world of your own creation. And that what you do is good or bad depending on your own mental states. So, I mean, technically you could say that you kill one person in order to save 100 people, then you're doing some good, but you're also doing some evil. And for someone striving for enlightenment, you're better off doing neither good nor evil. Because good is just good karma, which keeps you in samsara. It may land you in a heaven realm, but it's still in samsara. You do evil, that's bad karma, that just lands you in more samsara, either way. But if you do nothing, you just observe, like with equanimity, upekkha literally means just looking upon, then that is just ethically neutral, so long as your mental states are neutral. So, I mean, in some cases, and I've discussed this before, that especially a layperson, if you're not a monk, you're not totally committed to being a saint anyhow, then you may choose, as is your right, to take a moral hit. You know, you think, well, I'm going to make some bad karma by killing this guy, but still, it's worth it in order to save those 100 other people. And that's your choice to make. You're still going to be doing bad karma by doing it, but you have the right to make that choice. So, I'm just going to go on to the next question, I guess. But I do not think that that is a Theravada Buddhist story. The next question is from Newman. And Newman says, is life in the world the existential equivalent to scrolling? Like doom scrolling, I think. And monk life is logging off. No, I think monk life is just you've got a very simplified app, and you're not scrolling as much, or you're just scrolling like a lot of it is just the same post over and over again, like a mantra. You just om, 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 om. But until you become enlightened, you're not logged off. So, I mean, it's just a kind of a loose, kind of arbitrary analogy, I think. Is life in the world the existential equivalent to scrolling or doom scrolling? To some degree, yeah. I mean, it's just, doom scrolling is just a symptom of, you know, people do it so much because it's just in accordance with human nature. You just want, you know, more and more stimulation. It's just an easy way of getting stimulation in like dopamine hits or whatever it is. So monk life, you definitely, I mean, you're still, I mean, if life for an ordinary person is scrolling, then being a monk would still be scrolling. It would just be like a much reduced, simplified kind of scrolling. And logging off would be enlightenment, I suppose. Or at least parinibbana would be logging off. That is kind of a strange question, though. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Cyrus Frame. And Cyrus Frame says, I have found sankhara a difficult concept to get my head around. I am particularly interested in it as a Dhamma in the 5 aggregates of the Satipatthana. It seems to be composed of volition, emotions, and habits. Calling it mental formation suggests it is things, that is nouns, but maybe it is better to see its components as verbs rather than nouns, so processes. But a process is still a noun, isn't it? For example, perhaps volition is a process more than a thing. What do you think? Okay, well, yeah. I mean, first of all, dividing things up into like verbs and nouns, or like subject and predicate in a sentence, is just an arbitrary, like grammatical thing. It's not really reflective of reality, that you have to have like form and function separate from each other. But form and function are not separate from each other. It's right there in this, it's part of the same thing. So dividing it up into the noun and the verb, or the subject and the predicate or whatever, that's just grammar. It's not reflective of reality. It's just a quirk of human psychology. So sankhara, in the suttas, sankhara kanda, sankhara has different meanings. Like sabe sankhara dukkha, all things are conducive to suffering. Sankhara there, it just means anything samsaric, anything conditioned, anything with a cause, anything with a beginning and an end. That would be a sankhara in that case. But sankhara kanda, the aggregate of sankhara, which is one of the 5 aggregates which composes a human being, then according to the suttas, that's will. That's essentially your volition and essentially your karma. Although, according to Abhidhamma and the Abhidhamma commentarial tradition, then you've got 52 mental states that are ultimately real. And for some reason, the Buddha divided out sanya, or perception, and vedana, or feeling. Those two. And the other 50 are all sankhara. The other 50 mental states. But that is just a commentarial thing, and I really do think that it's volition. That sankhara kanda is will, which is also karma. And then, one of the first Buddhist philosophical essay I ever wrote was caused by me trying to figure out which comes first, the perception or the volition. Like, for example, you start to notice something. So you perceive something, but you have to draw your attention to it before you can really perceive it. But why would you draw your attention to it before you'd perceived it? So it's like, how does that work? I was sitting in this cave trying to figure it out, and I happened to read, it was like volume 2 of Buddhist Logic by some early Russian Buddhistic scholar named Cherbatsky, who made this statement just in passing. I think it was like in a footnote or something about just sort of the arbitrary division between a thing and its function, the noun and the verb. And then it just dawned on me that really perception and volition, they're just 2 functions of the same thing. It's like wind and blowing. You can't have blowing without wind. You can't have wind without blowing, or light and shining. Light is a noun. Shining is a verb. But you can't have light without shining, and you can't have shining without light. They're just necessarily just the same. And that's the way it just kind of dawned on me. Perception and volition are like the same kind of thing. That perception is just sort of like the noun aspect or the spatial aspect or the static aspect, and volition is more the verb aspect, the kinetic aspect of the same phenomenon. And so Schopenhauer had the world as will and representation, which is samsara as cetana and sanya. So let's see. Did I answer the question? Calling it mental formation, suggesting it as things, that is nouns, but maybe it is better to see its components as verbs. Dividing the noun and the verb is just this artificial grammatical distinction that's just a peculiarity of human psychology. To say that it's a verb rather than a noun, so it's a process, but process is a noun too. So perhaps volition is a process more than a thing. What do you think? Yeah, I think it's like the verb aspect of perception. And perception is the noun aspect of volition. A thing and its behavior. You cannot separate a thing and its behavior, especially if just sitting there motionless is a kind of behavior. So it's this whole kind of thinking has, it kind of played hob with the idea, like, I think it was Mahatma Gandhi said, you don't hate the sinner, you just hate the sin. But you cannot differentiate the two. You cannot differentiate like Pol Pot from what he did, because his behavior was Pol Pot too. So, yeah, I think you could probably tease out an answer to your question in all the verbiage I just spewed. And I'm just going to move on to the very last question. By golly, it's been more than 3 hours. This is from Snore Locos. And Snore Loco says, it's long been a tradition to tell ghost stories on Christmas Eve. Would you kindly? Also Burmese ghost stories. And ghost stories, I mean, my favorite Buddhist ghost story is from the Petal Watu. I've already told it a number of times. I won't belabor it by telling the same story, but it's about this woman who was unfaithful to her husband one time. She was a devout Buddhist woman, very virtuous, but she was unfaithful to her husband one time, and worse than that, when he called her out on it, or he found out or heard a rumor about it or something, she lied and swore up and down that she was not unfaithful to him. And that was even worse than being unfaithful to him from the ethical point of view of this story. So she winds up, because she was a virtuous woman, aside from that one incident, she winds up like a terrestrial deva or goddess living in the foothills of the Himalayas in this palatial compound with celestial trees and all this stuff, beautiful, living thousands of years. But every night she would go into like this trance state and go down to the lotus pool in front of the mansion, and this big dog would devour her. The bones would fall into the pond where they would reconstitute into the woman. She'd climb out, go back up to bed and go to sleep until the next night. And it would just, every night this would happen. And that's kind of the way Buddhist ghosts can be. You know, there's a continuum of ghosts at one end and like gods at the other. And so the highest ghost and the lowest god are just right up against each other. It may be very hard to tell the difference. But I mean, the hungry ghosts, that's a kind of a different aspect of ancient Indian philosophy. I mean, the idea of hungry ghosts, where they've got a huge belly and a tiny mouth, or a huge mouth and a tiny belly, so they can never be satisfied. That comes from ancestor worship. And it was originally ancestors, fathers, petas. I mean, the word for ghost in Buddhism literally means father, peta, or preta in Sanskrit. It's the ancestors that were not given food offerings. You know, in ancient Indian ancestor worship, you don't sustain your ancestors. They go hungry. They become hungry ghosts. But with regard to my own personal life, I apparently was able to see a ghost when I was a toddler. I vaguely remember, just barely remember, like this is like when I was like 3 or 4 years old, where we lived in a house where this lady had died in the house before my father bought the house. And apparently I could see the lady, and she never spoke to me, but there was just this older lady wearing like a print dress, and she was just smile at me. She apparently liked little kids. Go figure. Why do old ladies like little kids? I don't know. But she apparently liked me. I mean, she didn't scare me or anything. I was too young to be scared. But I would explain to my father about the lady I keep seeing, and he'd ask me what she looked like, and I would say, and he was like asking the neighbors, and found out that, you know, I was fairly well describing the lady that used to live there, and so on and so forth. My father firmly believed in ghosts. He used to do seances, and Sonora Locos may have heard me talking about the seance tape I listened to a few times when I was a kid of my father and my mother who were attending the seance. And so he said that he had seen ghosts a few times, but when he would see a ghost, he said that he'd seen a ghost a few times, but it was always just sort of like this hazy white shape in the room. And ghosts apparently cause coldness in the room. And it would seem like the closest you're going to get to a scientific explanation for that is they have to absorb energy to kind of maintain their existence. So they're kind of sucking the heat out of the room in order to use that heat energy just to maintain their manifestation in this version of existence or some such. He did have one of those nightmares, or, I mean, sometimes it's called a ghost. I think a lot of people do believe them to be ghosts, where, you know, you kind of wake up in the night and there's like this angry, dark being kind of holding you down, like pushing you down on the bed. It's a common nightmare. I've read about this in like a psychology book before, but I mean, that could be just a common sort of archetypal nightmare, or it could be some kind of spirit like my father thought it was. He thought it was the former owner of this other house that he was living in at the time. My little brother used to see a ghost He just called him the man, and he was a black man. And my father was asking him questions about the man and so forth. And at one of the seances he went to, he was talking to Uncle Henry, who was he was like formerly a slave of my great grandfather or some such. And then after the slaves were freed, then he just became like a member of the family. He was sort of like the butler or something. He was free, but he chose to still live there. And he was the only person who would stand up to my great grandfather, call him Baptist. His middle name was Baptist. He was the only person who would get away with calling him Baptist to his face. And so my father asked, because my little brother, when he's a kid, would see this man. Someone's going to sit down in a chair, and he's, oh, don't sit there. The man is sitting there. And I think most people would say it's just a little kid's imagination that he is just kind of taking too seriously. But if you would see the man at night, he'd start yelling. He'd be scared. During the daytime, it was fine, but at night, my brother was afraid of the dark. He'd have to have a night light and everything. So my father at this seance, Uncle Henry comes through, and my father says, have you been around our house lately? And Uncle Henry says yes. And he says, I'd appreciate it if you kind of don't come around the house too much, because you're scaring the hell out of my little kid. So then my brother stopped seeing the man after that. But whether that's a real ghost or not, or whether it's just tricks of human psychology, that's anyone can decide for themselves, I suppose. Most like Burmese ghosts, they're more of the monstrous type. They kind of take the whole Peta, the Buddhist lower realm idea more literally, I guess. But in Burma, the asane is considered to be the worst or the most dangerous kind of ghost. And an asane is someone who dies a violent or otherwise unnatural death. And the religion of the Burmese before they converted to Buddhism was the Nat cult. It was like 30 gnats. And a gnat comes from the Pali word nata, which means like Lord. But they were like small g gods that were asane. They were humans in their previous life, and they died like this violent or unnatural death, and they became powerful like terrestrial gods. You just did not violate their taboos in their territory, that sort of thing. Like there's like Lord of the White Elephant or something like that is one of these gnats that the Burmese, a lot of them still take seriously. And it's like you can't travel with a certain number of people. It's like he doesn't like 6 people or something like that are traveling together. So in the case that you've got just for whatever reason 6 people all traveling through this territory of Lord of the White Elephant or Lord of the White Horse or whatever his name is, then you like pick up a rock before you leave. You invite the rock to come with you, and that becomes like the 7th passenger, and then you can sort of not break the taboo by doing that. But you can still see like Nat shrines in Burma and Thailand from like the pre-Buddhist animism. But then when the Burmese converted to Buddhism, they just made Saka, king of gods, like the head Nat, leader of all the other Nats. And then that kind of incorporated the Nat cult into Buddhism. But yeah, the Burmese are definitely more afraid of ghosts in general than like Western people are. Like there's a cemetery I had to walk through to get to Lamie village, and some people they'd be afraid. It was just a road going through there, a dirt road. Some people would just be afraid to go through there alone or at night. I had one female supporter who she had to come in at night to tell me something. There was some sort of information she had to tell me. I don't remember what it was, but she was just obviously terrified. Burmese villagers tend to be pretty brown. Their complexion is fairly brown, but she was just ashen looking. She was so scared having to go through that cemetery at night, even though most of them have never seen a ghost or any such thing, but they definitely believe in them. Same is true in Thailand. But none of these are really the kind of ghost stories that Snor Locos was asking for, I assume, other than me maybe seeing the lady when I was 3 or 4 years old. But I guess that's the best you're going to have to deal with, because we've been going for 3 hours and 19 minutes according to this. And I need to do other things, I suppose. I should do other things. So I guess this will be good. And like I should always say at the beginning, and practically never do, if you got any questions you think I can answer, especially about Dharma, Theravada Buddhism, early Buddhism, meditation, just philosophy in general, maybe. I mean, the farther away you get from Theravada Buddhism and early Buddhism, the less likely I'll be able to give an intelligent answer. Maybe some Western philosophy, or just me personally, that kind of thing. I'm on fairly firm ground with regard to some of that. But no more than 3 questions, and count those question marks. If you've got what you consider to be one question, but there's 4 question marks distributed throughout the paragraph, then in all likelihood, that would really be 4 questions, wouldn't it? And look at the URL links below. Special shout out to Hans, who made a very generous donation to the cause earlier today, or maybe just yesterday. I just didn't see it in my email till today. And like and subscribe if you have not done so already. Consider obtaining one of my books if you like my teachings, because I'm more coherent in my writing than in my speaking. I don't say, like kind of stuff when I'm writing nearly as much as when I'm speaking impromptu. And like and subscribe. I think I already said that. And be happy.